A
Are
billionaire
you all
sits
right,
alone
sir?
every night. Same table, same silence, same empty chair that no one dares to fill. Until one waitress, drowning in debt and desperation, asks the question that shatters his carefully constructed world. Why do you always eat alone? His answer? An offer that could save her life, or destroy everything she's fought to build. This is a story about the moment when saying yes means risking it all, and saying no means staying trapped forever. Stay with me until the end, hit that like button, and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The rain came down in sheets that Thursday evening, turning the streets of downtown into rivers of reflected neon and blurred headlights. Inside Marcello's, an upscale Italian restaurant nestled between glass towers and boutique shops, the atmosphere was warm, golden, intimate. Soft piano music drifted through the air, mingling with the murmur of quiet conversations and the delicate clink of wine glasses. Maya Collins moved through the dining room with practiced efficiency, her movements automatic after 3 years of working the same floor, greeting the same regulars, reciting the same specials. Her white shirt was crisp despite the long shift, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail that she'd perfected in the staff bathroom. She smiled at customers, refilled water glasses, cleared plates, all while her mind tallied numbers she didn't want to think about. Rent, $1,200, due in 6 days. Her mother's medication, $340, needed by Tuesday. The electric bill she'd been pushing back for 2 months, $218, final notice already sent. Her tips tonight, maybe $90 if she was lucky. The math never worked. It hadn't worked in months. Table 7 needs another bottle of the Chianti, Roberto called from behind the bar, not looking up from the cocktail he was mixing. And your section just got sat again. Table 12. Maya nodded, pushing the numbers aside. She grabbed the wine, delivered it with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, and turned toward table 12 to greet the new arrivals. But table 12 was empty. No, not empty. Occupied, but by only one person. Ethan Hayes sat in his usual spot, the corner table by the floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the rain-soaked street below. Same table he'd occupied every Thursday and Saturday evening for the past 8 months. Same impeccably tailored charcoal suit, same Patek Philippe watch catching the candlelight, same posture of calm, controlled solitude. And as always, the same empty chair across from him. Maya had served him dozens of times. She knew his order by heart: sparkling water with lime, no ice. The grilled branzino with seasonal vegetables. A single glass of Barolo, never finished. He was unfailingly polite, spoke only when necessary, tipped exactly 40% every single time, calculated to the penny. He never made small talk, never asked how her day was, never looked at his phone. He simply sat, ate slowly, and stared at that empty chair as if he were dining with a ghost. "Good evening, Mr. Hayes," Maya said, approaching with her server's smile firmly in place. "Your usual table." "Good evening, Maya." His voice was quiet, measured. He always remembered her name. "Yes, thank you." She set down the menu out of habit, though he never looked at it. "Can I start you with sparkling water with lime, no ice, please, and I'll have the branzino." "Of course. Would you like the Barolo as well?" "Yes, thank you." The exchange was identical to every other time. Scripted, safe, predictable. Maya turned to leave, but something made her pause. Maybe it was the weight of the bills stacking up in her mind, or the exhaustion of pretending everything was fine, or the simple human need to break a pattern that had become suffocating. Whatever it was, the question slipped out before she could stop it. "Mr. Hayes?" He looked up, and for the first time in 8 months, she saw his eyes truly focus on her. They were gray, sharp, but not unkind. There was something in them, a depth, a weariness, that matched the ache she carried. "Yes?" The question sat on her tongue, dangerous and impulsive. Around them, the restaurant hummed with other lives, other conversations, other people who played their parts without stepping out of line. "Why do you always eat alone?" The piano player's hands faltered just for a second. The couple at the next table stopped mid-conversation. Even Roberto paused, wine bottle hovering over a glass, eyes darting toward the corner. The silence wasn't complete. The restaurant was too well bred for that. But it shifted, contracted, as if everyone had collectively held their breath. Ethan Hayes didn't react immediately. He didn't flinch, didn't dismiss her, didn't offer the polite deflection she expected. Instead, he looked at the empty chair across from him, his expression unreadable, his jaw tight. The moment stretched. 5 seconds? 10. Maya's heart hammered. She'd crossed a line, broken the unspoken rule between server and customer, between her world and his. She should apologize, laugh it off, retreat to the safety of professional distance. But she didn't move. Finally, Ethan looked back at her. When he spoke, his voice was quieter than before, but there was something raw beneath the control. "Because," he said, "I'm waiting for someone to ask that question." The answer hung in the air between them, impossible to interpret and impossible to ignore. Maya opened her mouth, closed it again. She didn't know what to say. Didn't know what he meant. Didn't know if she'd just made the biggest mistake of her shift or stumbled into something she wasn't prepared for. I'll get your water," she managed, her voice barely steady. She turned and walked toward the bar, her pulse racing, her hands trembling just enough that she had to concentrate on not dropping anything. Roberto gave her a look, half curiosity, half warning. "What was that about?" "I don't know," Maya whispered, but that wasn't entirely true. Something had shifted, something she couldn't name, couldn't explain, but could feel like the change in air pressure before a storm. The rest of the dinner service passed in a blur. Maya brought Ethan his water, his wine, his meal. He ate slowly, as he always did, but this time she caught him watching her, not in a way that made her uncomfortable, but in a way that suggested he was seeing her for the first time. Really seeing her. When she cleared his plate, he spoke again. "Maya." She stopped. "Yes? Do you have a few minutes after your shift?" Every instinct screamed at her to say no, to keep the boundary intact, to not complicate the one stable thing in her chaotic life. This job, these tips, this routine. I'm not sure it's not what you think," he said calmly. "I'd like to offer you something. A conversation, nothing more. 5 minutes of your time." The weight of the unpaid bills pressed against her chest. The memory of her mother's worried voice on the phone last night. The electric company's final notice taped to her apartment door. "Okay," she heard herself say. 5 minutes. The rain had softened to a drizzle by the time Maya's shift ended at 10:30. She changed out of her work shirt, pulled on her jacket, thin, fraying at the cuffs, barely enough for the November chill, and met Ethan in the small courtyard behind the restaurant where the staff usually took smoke breaks. He stood under the awning, hands in his pockets, looking out at the rain-slicked street. He'd loosened his tie slightly, the only concession to the late hour. "Thank you for meeting me," he said when she approached. Maya wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly aware of how small she felt next to him, not physically, but in presence, in resources, in the sheer weight of the worlds they occupied. "You said you wanted to talk." "I did." He turned to face her fully. "Your question tonight, why I eat alone. It wasn't idle curiosity, was it?" She hesitated. "I didn't mean to pry." "You weren't prying. You were asking something real, and that's rare." The compliment, if that's what it was, unsettled her more than a reprimand would have. "I don't understand what you want, Mr. Hayes." "Ethan," he corrected gently, "and what I want is to answer your question properly. But first, I need to ask you one. How long have you been working here?" 3 years. "And before that?" She frowned. "Why does that matter?" "Humor me." Maya sighed. "I was in college, pre-med. I had to drop out sophomore year when my father died and my mother got sick. Someone had to work. Someone had to take care of her. I'm the only child, so I did." He nodded slowly, as if this confirmed something he'd suspected. "You carry yourself like someone who's forgotten what it feels like to be seen, not as a waitress, not as a caretaker, not as someone struggling, but as a person with potential that hasn't been given a chance to unfold." The words hit her like a physical blow. She looked away, blinking against the sudden sting in her eyes. "That's a hell of an assumption to make about someone you've barely spoken to." "I've been watching you for 8 months, Maya. Not in a strange way, but in the way someone recognizes a reflection of something they understand. You're smart. You're disciplined. You handle pressure without breaking. You treat people with dignity even when you're exhausted. Those aren't common traits. What do you want? She asked again, her voice tight. I want to offer you a job. The world seemed to tilt slightly. What? A real job at my company. Hayes Collective handles venture capital, strategic consulting, and philanthropic project management. We're selective about who we hire, but we're always looking for people who think differently, people who've had to fight for everything they have. Maya stared at him. You don't even know if I'm qualified. I know enough. Your question tonight told me you're willing to take risks when it matters. Your work ethic here tells me you're reliable. The rest can be taught. This is insane, she breathed. You can't just offer someone a job because they asked you a personal question. I'm not offering you a job because of the question, Ethan said. I'm offering you a job because I've spent 8 months in this restaurant watching talented people serve food and pretend that's all they're capable of. You're not pretending, you're enduring. And I'm tired of watching people with potential waste it because they don't have access to the right door. The cynical part of Maya, the part that had been burned too many times, that knew better than to trust sudden generosity, reared up hard. What's the catch? No catch. You'd start in an entry-level analyst position. Salary would be $75,000 annually, with full benefits, including health insurance that would cover your mother's medications. You'd work standard hours. No nights, no weekends unless absolutely necessary. If you prove yourself, you move up. If you don't, you move on. Simple as that. $75,000. Health insurance. No more late nights scraping together tips. No more choosing between rent and medication. No more pretending she wasn't drowning. It was too much, too fast, too good to be real. Why? The word came out broken, desperate. Why would you do this? Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight she hadn't heard before. Something personal, something that cost him to admit. Because 5 years ago, I sat alone at a different table, in a different restaurant, after losing my wife. I was a single father with a 2-year-old son and a company I'd built with her that felt meaningless without her in it. And a stranger, a waiter, actually, asked me the same question you asked tonight. Why do you always eat alone? I didn't have an answer then. But his question made me realize I was disappearing into my grief, and my son deserved better than a ghost for a father. He paused, looking at the empty street. That waiter's name was David. He was working 3 jobs to put himself through community college. I hired him. He's now my director of operations, and one of the most capable people I know. So when I say I'm offering you this because I recognize something, I mean it. I know what it looks like when someone is capable of more than their circumstances allow. Maya's throat tightened. The story was too specific, too vulnerable to be a manipulation. And yet, I need time to think, she said. Of course, take the weekend. But Maya, he reached into his jacket and pulled out a business card, holding it out to her. If you decide you want this, don't wait too long. Opportunities have expiration dates, and life doesn't pause while we figure out whether we're brave enough to take them. She took the card. It was simple, elegant. Ethan Hayes, CEO, Hayes Collective, with a phone number and email address. I'll think about it, she said quietly. That's all I ask. Bassem. Maya didn't sleep that night. She sat at her tiny kitchen table in the apartment she shared with her mother, a 1-bedroom walk-up in a neighborhood that had seen better decades, and stared at Ethan's business card until the words blurred. Her mother was asleep in the bedroom, the soft wheeze of her breathing audible through the thin walls. Maya had taken the couch for the past 4 years, ever since she'd moved back in to help. It was fine. She was used to it. But sitting there, in the dim light of the single lamp that worked, surrounded by the physical evidence of a life held together by duct tape and sheer willpower, Maya felt the full weight of the choice in front of her. She could say yes. She could walk away from Marcello's, from the grind of double shifts and condescending customers and tips that never quite covered the bills. She could take the job, the salary, the health insurance that would mean her mother could actually afford the medications the doctor recommended instead of the cheaper alternatives that barely worked. She could breathe. Or she could say no. She could stay in the life she knew, the life she'd built with her own hands, where she didn't owe anyone anything and wasn't beholden to a stranger's generosity that might evaporate the moment she failed to meet expectations she didn't understand. Safety, control, the devil she knew. Her phone buzzed. A text from her mother's pharmacy. Prescription ready for pickup. Total $340. Please collect within 48 hours. Maya closed her eyes. The math was simple. Brutal, but simple. She couldn't afford to say no. But she also couldn't afford to trust that saying yes wouldn't make things worse. Friday morning came too fast. Maya dragged herself through her opening shift at Marcello's, moving on autopilot, her mind 1,000 miles away. "You look like hell," Roberto said, sliding a coffee across the bar to her during a lull. "Rough night?" "Something like that." "Does it have anything to do with your conversation with Mr. Moneybags yesterday?" Maya took a sip of the coffee, letting the bitterness ground her. "He offered me a job." Roberto's eyebrows shot up. "Seriously?" "Seriously." "And you said—" "I said I'd think about it." "Maya." Roberto leaned against the bar, his expression shifting from curiosity to concern. "I've known you for 3 years. You're smart as hell, you work harder than anyone here, and you're wasted in this place. If someone's offering you a way out, a real way out, you'd be crazy not to take it." "You don't know him," Maya said. "I don't know him. For all I know, this is some kind of setup, or he's got ulterior motives, or maybe he's just a decent guy who sees what everyone else here sees, but actually has the power to do something about it," Roberto interrupted. "Look, I get it. You've been burned. Life's taught you not to trust good things. But sometimes, Maya, good things are just good things. And if you keep saying no to them out of fear, you're going to wake up 10 years from now still wiping down tables and wondering what if." The words hit harder than she wanted to admit. "I have to go check on table 4, she muttered, setting down the coffee and walking away before Roberto could say anything else. Saturday came, Maya's day off. She spent it at the library, using their free Wi-Fi to research Hayes Collective. What she found made the offer even more surreal. The company was legitimate, more than legitimate. It was a mid-sized firm with an impressive portfolio, investments in sustainable technology, partnerships with nonprofits focused on education and healthcare access, a track record of backing startups that prioritize social impact alongside profit. And Ethan Hayes himself? The articles painted a picture of a man who'd built the company from scratch with his late wife, an environmental engineer named Sarah Hayes, who died in a car accident 5 years ago. After her death, Ethan had restructured the company's mission to focus on the causes she'd cared about, while also raising their son, now 7 years old, as a single father. There were photos. Ethan at charity galas, Ethan speaking at conferences, Ethan in a candid shot at a park with a small boy on his shoulders, both of them laughing. He looked different in those photos, less controlled, more human. Maya closed the laptop, her heart racing. This was real. The offer was real. The man was real. And that made it terrifying. Saturday evening, Maya's shift at Marcello's. 6 o'clock. Ethan arrived at his usual time, took his usual table, ordered his usual meal. But this time, when Maya brought his water, her hands were shaking. "Have you made a decision?" he asked quietly, before she could set down the glass. She had. She'd thought about nothing else for 48 hours. She'd run every scenario, weighed every risk, talked herself in and out of it 100 times. And she'd landed on the answer that made the most sense, even if it broke something inside her to say it. "I can't accept your offer." Ethan's expression didn't change. "May I ask why?" Maya set down the glass carefully, concentrating on keeping her voice steady. "Because I don't know you. Because this feels too good to be true. And in my experience, things that feel that way usually are. Because I have responsibilities I can't risk on a stranger's generosity, no matter how well-intentioned. I need stability, Mr. Hayes. And taking a job from someone I've known for 5 minutes, someone who made the offer based on one conversation, that's not stability. That's a gamble I can't afford to lose." It was the smart answer. The safe answer. The answer that would keep her life exactly as it was. Hard, exhausting, barely sustainable. But hers. Ethan nodded slowly. "I understand. Do you?" "Yes." He met her eyes, and there was no anger there, no disappointment, just a quiet acceptance that somehow made her feel worse than if he'd argued. "You're protecting yourself. That's not wrong. I just hope you're not protecting yourself from something that could actually help." "I appreciate the offer," Maya said, her throat tight. "I do." but this is my answer. Then I respect it. He picked up his menu, signaling the end of the conversation. I'll have the branzino, please. Maya nodded and walked away, her chest aching with a loss she couldn't name. She'd made the right choice. She'd made the safe choice. So why did it feel like she'd just closed a door she'd never get another chance to open? The rest of the evening blurred together. Maya went through the motions, served tables, smiled at customers, counted her tips at the end of the night. $87, slightly below average. She walked home in the cold, the card in her pocket feeling like a stone. When she got to her apartment, her mother was awake, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of tea and a worried expression. Maya, sweetheart, I got a call from Dr. Morrison's office today. Maya's stomach dropped. What did they say? They're recommending I start a new treatment protocol. It's more effective than what I'm on now, but her mother's voice faltered. It's expensive. Even with the assistance program, it's about $600 a month. $600. Maya sat down heavily in the chair across from her mother, the numbers cascading through her mind like an avalanche. Rent, utilities, food, her mother's current medications. And now this. It was impossible. Completely, mathematically impossible. We'll figure it out, Maya said automatically, the lie sitting bitter on her tongue. Her mother reached across the table and took her hand. You do too much, Maya. You've given up too much for me already. If I need to go without... No, Maya's voice was sharp. You're not going without. I'll pick up extra shifts. You're already working yourself to death. Then I'll work harder. Her mother's eyes filled with tears. This isn't the life I wanted for you. It's the life I have, Maya said, gentler now. And it's fine. I'm fine. We'll figure it out. But as she lay on the couch that night, staring at the water-stained ceiling, Ethan's words echoed in her mind. Opportunities have expiration dates, and life doesn't pause while we figure out whether we're brave enough to take them. She'd chosen safety. She'd chosen fear. And now she'd have to live with that choice. Sunday morning. Maya's phone rang at 7 a.m., jerking her out of a restless sleep. It was her manager at Marcello's. Maya, I need you to come in early today. Jen called in sick, and we're short-staffed for brunch service. I'm not scheduled until 3, Maya said, her voice rough with exhaustion. I know, but I really need you. I'll comp you a meal and make sure you're on the good section. Maya closed her eyes. The good section meant better tips. Better tips meant maybe she could cover an extra $50 toward the new medication. I'll be there in an hour. The brunch shift was chaos. Families with screaming children, tourists who didn't understand tipping, a kitchen that couldn't keep up with the orders. Maya moved through it mechanically, her body present, but her mind somewhere else. She was refilling coffee at table 9 when she heard the hostess's voice from the front. Mr. Hayes, welcome back. Your usual table? Maya's head snapped up. Ethan was there, in the middle of a Sunday brunch rush, looking slightly out of place without his suit. He wore a dark sweater and jeans, more casual than she'd ever seen him, and beside him, holding his hand, was a small boy with dark hair and curious eyes. His son. Maya felt her chest tighten. She'd been so focused on Ethan as a CEO, as a stranger making an impossible offer, that she'd almost forgotten this detail. He was a father, a single parent, just like her mother had been after her father died. The hostess led them to the corner table. The empty chair was still there. Maya watched as Ethan lifted his son into one of the chairs, helped him with his menu, pointed at pictures of the food. The boy said something that made Ethan smile. Really smile, not the controlled expression he wore during his solo dinners. And the glimpse of warmth in his face made him look younger, less guarded, human. Table 9 is still waiting on that coffee, Roberto called from behind the bar. Maya snapped back to attention, finished her rounds, and tried not to look at the corner table. But 20 minutes later, when the brunch rush finally eased, she found herself walking over. Good morning, she said, her voice steadier than she felt. Can I get you started with drinks? Ethan looked up, and something flickered in his expression. Surprise, maybe, or something else she couldn't read. Good morning, Maya. This is my son, Oliver. The boy looked up at her with bright, inquisitive eyes. Hi, Dad says you work really hard here. Maya blinked. He said that? Yep. He says you're one of the smartest people he knows. Heat crept up Maya's neck. That's very kind of him. Ethan had the grace to look slightly embarrassed. Oliver tends to repeat everything I say, sometimes verbatim. I like your hair, Oliver announced. It's really long. Can you do a braid like Elsa? Despite everything, Maya felt a smile tug at her lips. I've never tried, but I bet I could learn. Cool! Maya took their drink orders, orange juice for Oliver, coffee for Ethan, and retreated to the bar, her heart pounding. Roberto raised an eyebrow. That the guy? That's the guy. And the kid? His son. Roberto whistled low. Single dad billionaire offering you a better life. Maya, if you don't take that job, I'm going to assume you've lost your mind. It's not that simple. It never is. But sometimes the complicated choice is still the right one. Maya brought their drinks, took their food orders, and tried to maintain professional distance. But Oliver made that nearly impossible. Do you have kids? He asked while she was setting down his juice. No, I don't. Do you want kids? Oliver, Ethan said gently, that's a personal question. But you ask people personal questions all the time. Ethan's mouth twitched. That's different. How? Because I'm an adult and you're 7. That's not fair. Maya bit back a laugh. It's okay. I don't mind. She looked at Oliver. I haven't really thought about it. Maybe someday. You should think about it, Oliver said seriously. Kids are great. I'm great. You certainly seem confident about that, Maya said, grinning. Dad says confidence is important. Your dad says a lot of things, apparently. Ethan shook his head, but there was warmth in his eyes. I've created a monster. The meal passed in fragments of conversation. Maya checked on them periodically, and each time Oliver pulled her into some new topic. His favorite dinosaur, Spinosaurus. His least favorite vegetable, Brussels sprouts, which Ethan was currently trying to get him to eat. His theory about why the sky was blue, which involved a creative but scientifically inaccurate explanation about sky paint. It was the most normal interaction Maya had had in months, maybe years. And watching Ethan with his son, patient, present, genuinely engaged, shifted something in her perception. This wasn't just a CEO making a calculated business decision. This was a man who understood responsibility, sacrifice, the weight of caring for someone who depended on you completely. He understood her life in a way most people didn't. When they finished eating, Ethan paid the check, 40% tip, as always, and stood to leave. Maya, he said quietly, while Oliver was distracted by a family with a baby at the next table. I meant what I said yesterday. I respect your decision, but if you change your mind, the offer stands. Not because I need you to say yes, but because I think you deserve the chance to say yes to something better. Before Maya could respond, Oliver tugged on Ethan's hand. Dad, can Maya come to my birthday party next month, please? Ethan looked startled. Oliver, I don't think... Please? You said I could invite who I wanted, and I want to invite Maya. Maya's throat tightened. That's very sweet, Oliver, but you don't have to, Ethan said quickly. He gets enthusiastic about people he likes, but there's no obligation. Oliver's face fell. But I really want her to come. Maya looked at this 7-year-old boy who barely knew her, and at his father who'd offered her a lifeline she'd been too afraid to take, and felt something crack in the careful walls she'd built. Tell you what, she said, crouching down to Oliver's level. If I'm free that day, I'll try my best to be there. Deal? Oliver's face lit up. Deal! As they left, Maya watched them through the window, Ethan's hand on Oliver's shoulder, the boy chattering away about something, both of them disappearing into the Sunday afternoon crowd. And she felt the full weight of what she'd turned down. Not just a job, a chance to be part of something, to matter to people who saw her as more than just the person refilling their water glass, to stop surviving and start living. That night, Maya sat at the kitchen table again, Ethan's business card in front of her, her mother's new prescription paperwork beside it. The numbers didn't lie. She couldn't do this alone. She'd been trying for 4 years, and she was drowning. Slowly, but drowning nonetheless. And Ethan, despite every reason to be guarded, had looked at her and seen potential, had offered her a rope without asking for anything in return, except that she be willing to try. Maybe Roberto was right. Maybe sometimes good things were just good things. And maybe, just maybe, she'd spent so long protecting herself from disappointment that she'd forgotten how to recognize opportunity when it appeared. Maya picked up her phone, typed out Ethan's number, stared at the blank message screen for 10 full minutes. Then, before she could talk herself out of it again, she wrote, "Mr. Hayes, this is Maya Collins from Marcello's. I've reconsidered your offer. If it's still available, I'd like to accept. I can start whenever works for you. Thank you for seeing something in me I'd forgotten to see in myself." She hit send before fear could stop her. Then she sat in the quiet kitchen, heart pounding, waiting for a response that would either change everything or confirm that she'd waited too long and the door had already closed. 3 minutes passed. 5. 10. Her phone buzzed. "Maya, I'm very glad to hear from you. The offer absolutely still stands. Can you meet me at my office tomorrow at 10 a.m.? We'll discuss details, get paperwork started, and plan your transition. Bring any questions you have. And Maya, you didn't forget to see it. You just needed permission to believe what you already knew. See you tomorrow." Ethan. Maya read the message 3 times. Then she put her head down on the table and cried, deep, shaking sobs that released 4 years of pressure, fear, exhaustion, and the crushing weight of trying to be strong enough to carry everything alone. When her mother emerged from the bedroom, alarmed by the sound, Maya looked up with tears streaming down her face and said, "I got a new job. A real job. We're going to be okay." Her mother pulled her into a hug, and for the first time in longer than Maya could remember, she believed the words she'd just said. They were going to be okay. Not because life had suddenly become easy, but because she'd finally been brave enough to say yes to the possibility that it could be different. And tomorrow she would walk through a door she'd almost let close forever and find out what waited on the other side. Maya stood outside the glass tower on 5th Avenue at 9:45 the next morning, her reflection staring back at her from the building's pristine surface. She barely recognized herself. She'd worn her only professional outfit, a navy blazer she'd bought at a thrift store 3 years ago, and black slacks that were slightly too loose now after months of skipping meals to make rent. Her resume, printed at the library yesterday evening, sat in a folder that trembled slightly in her hands. The building stretched 30 stories into a sky that threatened rain. Hayes Collective occupied floors 12 through 15 according to the directory in the lobby. Maya took a breath, pushed through the revolving door, and stepped into a world that felt like it belonged to someone else's life. The lobby was all marble and ambient lighting, with a reception desk staffed by a woman in a crisp white shirt who smiled as Maya approached. "Good morning. How can I help you?" "I have an appointment with Ethan Hayes at 10. The receptionist's eyebrows rose slightly. Whether from recognition of the name or surprise that someone dressed like Maya had an appointment with the CEO, Maya couldn't tell. "Name, please?" "Maya Collins." The woman typed something into her computer, then nodded. "Yes, Mr. Hayes is expecting you. 12th floor, suite 1200. The elevators are just to your right." Maya thanked her and crossed the lobby, her shoes clicking against the marble with a sound that felt too loud, too noticeable. In the elevator, she watched the numbers climb and tried to calm the hammering of her heart. This was real. This was happening. And there was no going back now. The elevator doors opened onto a reception area that managed to feel both professional and warm. Soft gray walls, modern furniture, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. A younger man sat at the front desk, his tie slightly loosened, typing rapidly on his computer. He looked up as Maya stepped out. "You must be Maya. I'm Jordan, Ethan's assistant. He's just finishing up a call. Should be ready for you in just a moment. Can I get you anything? Coffee? Water?" "Water would be great, thank you." Jordan returned a minute later with a bottle of sparkling water and a glass. "He tries to convert everyone to sparkling," Jordan said with a grin. "Fair warning." Maya managed a smile. "I noticed that tendency." "Right, Marcello's. He talks about that place more than you'd think. Apparently the branzino is life-changing." Before Maya could respond, a door opened down the hall and Ethan emerged, phone to his ear, nodding at whatever the person on the other end was saying. He was in a suit again, different from the one at the restaurant, charcoal with fine pinstripes, and he moved with the focused energy of someone whose time was measured in minutes. He saw Maya and held up one finger. 1 minute. "I understand the concern, Richard, but we've run the numbers 6 different ways, and the outcome is consistent. The risk is manageable if we structure it correctly? Yes. No, I want Sarah's team on the environmental impact assessment before we move forward. Exactly. Let's schedule a follow-up for Thursday. Good. Thanks. He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket, his expression shifting as he turned his full attention to Maya. Maya, thank you for coming. Thank you for seeing me. Come on back. He gestured down the hall. Jordan, can you hold my calls for the next hour? Already done. Ethan's office was smaller than Maya expected. Not cramped, but not the sprawling executive suite she'd imagined. One wall was entirely windows, offering a view of the city that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. The other walls held framed photos. Oliver at various ages, a stunning woman with kind eyes who must have been Sarah, a few pictures of what looked like project sites, a school in a rural area, a solar panel installation, a community garden. Sit, please. Ethan gestured to a chair across from his desk, then settled into his own. For a moment, he just looked at her, and Maya fought the urge to fidget under the scrutiny. I'm glad you changed your mind, he said finally. I almost didn't. I know, that's why I'm glad you did. It would have been easier to stay where you were. Maya nodded, surprised by how well he understood. My mother needed new medication. The cost was, well, it made the choice clearer. Money has a way of simplifying decisions, doesn't it? For better or worse. He opened a folder on his desk. I want to be transparent about what you're walking into. This isn't a charity position, Maya. I'm not hiring you because I feel sorry for you. I'm hiring you because I believe you have skills that will be valuable to this company, and because those skills haven't had a proper outlet. But that also means I'll have expectations. I understand. Do you? His tone wasn't harsh, just direct. You'll be starting in our strategic analysis department, working under David Chen, the man I mentioned, who used to be a waiter. He's brilliant, demanding, and he doesn't suffer laziness or excuses. You'll be analyzing investment proposals, researching market trends, preparing reports for senior staff. The hours are reasonable by industry standards, usually 8 to 6, sometimes later during critical periods. The work is intellectually challenging. You'll be surrounded by people with MBAs from top-tier schools, people who've been groomed for this kind of work since they were teenagers. It can be intimidating. Maya's stomach clenched, but she kept her voice steady. Are you trying to talk me out of this? No, I'm making sure you know what you're accepting. There's a difference between opportunity and guarantee, Maya. I can give you the first. The second is up to you. The honesty was bracing, but also oddly reassuring. This wasn't a rescue mission. It was a transaction, and Ethan was being clear about the terms. I'm not afraid of hard work, Maya said. And I'm not afraid of being intimidated. I've spent the last 4 years being underestimated. I'd rather be challenged. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Approval, maybe, or recognition. Good. Then let's talk specifics. They spent the next 40 minutes going through the details. Salary, $75,000, as promised, paid bi-weekly. Health insurance that would kick in immediately, with coverage comprehensive enough to include her mother. A 401k match after 6 months. 2 weeks of vacation in the first year, 3 weeks after that. Performance reviews every 6 months. When can you start? Ethan asked. Maya thought about Marcello's, about the shifts she'd already been scheduled for, about Roberto and the other servers who'd become something like family over the past 3 years. I need to give notice. 2 weeks is standard, but if you need me sooner, 2 weeks is fine, Ethan said. It'll give us time to prepare your workspace and get you set up in our systems. Your official start date will be 3 weeks from today. That gives you 2 weeks' notice, plus a few days to handle any personal matters before you begin. Maya nodded, relief washing through her. She hadn't wanted to abandon Marcello's without proper warning, even if she was desperate to start this new chapter. One more thing, Ethan said. He pulled another folder from his desk drawer. This is your offer letter and the standard employment contract. Take it home, read it carefully. If you have questions, ask them. If you want a lawyer to review it, do that. Don't sign anything until you're comfortable with every word. Maya took the folder, touched by the gesture. Most employers would have pushed for an immediate signature. Thank you. I want you to trust this process, Maya, and trust starts with transparency. He stood, extending his hand. Welcome to Hayes Collective. Officially. She stood and shook his hand, and for the first time since walking into the building, the knot in her chest loosened slightly. This was real. She'd done it. The walk back to her apartment felt surreal, like she was moving through a dream version of the city. The same streets she'd walked 1,000 times before looked different now, charged with possibility. Maya stopped at a coffee shop, an actual coffee shop, not just the break room at work, and bought herself a latte with money she didn't have to count 3 times before spending. Small victories. When she got home, her mother was in the kitchen making lunch, the radio playing softly in the background. How did it go? Her mother asked, turning from the stove. Maya set down her bag and pulled out the folder with the offer letter. I start in 3 weeks. Her mother's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes filling with tears. Oh, sweetheart. The insurance starts immediately. I already checked. Your new medication is covered, 100%. The tears spilled over then, and Maya found herself crying too, both of them holding on to each other in the cramped kitchen that had witnessed so many moments of stress and fear and desperate calculations. You did it, her mother whispered. You actually did it. We did it, Maya corrected. You're the reason I know how to keep going when things are hard. They stood there for a long moment, and Maya felt the shift happening in real time. The slow exhale of years of tension, the cautious unfurling of hope. What? That evening, Maya returned to Marcello's for her scheduled shift. She found her manager, Tony, in his office doing paperwork. Hey, Maya, what's up? She closed the door behind her. I need to give you my 2 weeks' notice. Tony looked up sharply. You're leaving? I got another job. A better opportunity. He studied her face, then sighed and leaned back in his chair. Can't say I'm surprised. You've always been too sharp for this place. Where are you going? Hayes Collective. It's a consulting and venture capital firm downtown. Tony whistled low. That's a hell of a jump. Good for you, Maya. Really, when's your last day? They worked out the details. Maya would finish out the next 2 weeks, train her replacement if Tony found one in time, and do her best to leave everything in good order. For what it's worth, Tony said as she was leaving his office, this place won't be the same without you. You're one of the best we've got. Thanks, Tony. That means a lot. When she told Roberto during their shift, his reaction was immediate and enthusiastic. I knew it, he crowed, nearly dropping the martini he was making. I knew you'd take that job. When do you start? 3 weeks. And you're really going to spend 2 of those weeks here? Maya, you could have just quit. I'm not going to leave you guys in a lurch. Besides, I need the tips to hold me over until my first paycheck. Roberto shook his head, grinning. Always practical. Fine. But we're throwing you a going-away party your last night. No arguments. The shift passed in a blur of congratulations and questions from the other servers. And when Ethan arrived for his usual Saturday dinner, Maya approached his table with a mixture of nervousness and something that might have been excitement. Good evening, Mr. Hayes. He looked up, and there was warmth in his expression that hadn't been there during their business meeting. I think you can call me Ethan now. We're going to be colleagues. Ethan, she corrected, testing out the informality. Same order? Please. And Maya, I'm glad you're here tonight. I wanted to thank you. She frowned. For what? For taking the risk. I know it wasn't easy. You made it easier by being honest about what I was walking into. Still, it takes courage to choose the unknown over the familiar, even when the familiar isn't working. Not everyone has that courage. Maya felt her throat tighten. I'll try not to make you regret giving me the chance. I won't, Ethan said simply. Now go get my overpriced fish before Roberto starts giving me judgmental looks from the bar. Maya laughed, actually laughed, and walked away feeling lighter than she had in years. The 2 weeks at Marcello's passed faster than Maya expected. She trained a new server named Jessica, a college student who reminded Maya of herself 4 years ago. Bright, hardworking, trying to make ends meet while building towards something better. Maya gave her all the tricks she'd learned, all the shortcuts for managing difficult customers and maximizing tips. You're really good at this, Jessica said one night after a particularly brutal dinner rush. Why are you leaving? Because being good at something doesn't mean it's where you're supposed to stay, Maya said. Sometimes you have to let yourself move toward the thing you're meant to do, even if you're not sure what that is yet. On her last night, true to his word, Roberto organized a small party after closing. The staff pooled money for a gift card and a card they'd all signed, and Tony gave a short speech about how Maya had been one of the best servers he'd ever worked with, and how he expected to see her name in the business section of the newspaper someday. It was silly and sentimental and exactly what Maya needed. When she left Marcello's for the final time, she paused at the door and looked back at the dining room. The tables she'd served, the bar where she'd commiserated with Roberto, the corner table where Ethan had sat alone for 8 months before asking her a question that changed everything. Then she walked out into the November night and didn't look back. The weekend before her start date, Maya went shopping for work clothes, a task that proved more stressful than she'd anticipated. Everything in the professional women's sections of department stores seemed designed for people with completely different budgets. She finally found a few pieces at a discount retailer. 2 pairs of dress pants, 3 blouses, a second blazer. It wasn't much, but it would get her through the first few weeks until she could buy more. Sunday evening, she laid out her outfit for the next day, set 3 alarms, and tried to sleep. It didn't work. She lay awake running through scenarios, imagining everything that could go wrong, everything she didn't know, every way she might fail to meet the expectations that had been set. At 5 in the morning, she gave up on sleep and got up to make coffee. Her mother found her at the kitchen table an hour later, staring into space. Nervous? Terrified? Her mother sat down across from her. You know what I remember about your first day of high school? Maya shook her head. You came downstairs wearing the outfit you'd planned for weeks, took one look at your breakfast, and threw up in the sink. Mom, let me finish. You were so scared of not fitting in, of being too much or not enough, of all the ways it could go wrong. And I told you then what I'm going to tell you now. You are enough, Maya, exactly as you are. You don't have to be perfect. You just have to show up and do your best. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. What if my best isn't good enough? Then you'll learn and get better. But I don't think that's going to be the problem. I think you're going to walk in there and remind everyone why Ethan Hayes saw something in you in the first place. Maya arrived at Hayes Collective at 8:30, 30 minutes before she was supposed to. Jordan was already at his desk, looking annoyingly awake for someone who probably commuted from somewhere in Brooklyn. First day, he announced cheerfully. Ready to have your brain broken by David Chen's presentation style? That's encouraging. Don't worry, he's actually great, just very intense. Come on, I'll take you up to 14. That's where the strategic analysis team works. They took the elevator up 2 floors, and Maya stepped out into an open-plan office that buzzed with quiet activity. People clustered around desks, examining screens, having low-voiced conversations. Everyone looked young, polished, purposeful. Jordan led her to a desk near the windows. Not a private office, but a decent-sized workspace with a new computer and a small potted plant that someone had left as a welcome gift. This is you, Jordan said. Computer's all set up with your login credentials. I'll write them down for you. David should be here in about 15 minutes for your orientation. Oh, and there's a new hire packet in your top drawer with all the boring HR stuff you need to fill out. Thank you, Jordan. No problem. Welcome to the chaos. He grinned and headed back to the elevator. Maya sat down at her desk, in an office at a real company, and took a moment to let the reality sink in. Through the window, she could see the city stretching out below, thousands of people moving through their own lives, pursuing their own versions of this moment. She'd made it. Maya Collins? She turned to find a man in his early 30s approaching, hand extended. He was Asian American, sharply dressed in a way that managed to be professional without being stuffy. And he moved with the kind of confidence that came from knowing exactly what he was doing. David Chen, he said as they shook hands. Welcome to the team. Ethan told me about you. All good things, I hope. He said you ask questions nobody else has the guts to ask, which in this line of work is either going to make you invaluable or get you fired within a month. David's expression was deadpan, but there was a glint of humor in his eyes. Let's aim for invaluable, shall we? Despite her nerves, Maya smiled. I'll do my best. Good. Come on, let's get you oriented. Fair warning, I'm going to throw a lot of information at you very quickly, and you're going to feel overwhelmed. That's normal. Nobody expects you to understand everything on day 1. But I do expect you to take notes and ask questions when you don't understand something. Clear? Clear? The next 4 hours were exactly as David had warned, a fire hose of information about company structure, current projects, analytical methodologies, software systems, reporting requirements. Maya's hand cramped from taking notes, and her head spun with acronyms and frameworks and names of people she'd be working with. They broke for lunch at noon, and David took her to the building's cafeteria, a surprisingly nice space on the 25th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and food that actually looked appetizing. "So," David said as they sat down with their trays, "Ethan mentioned you were working as a waitress before this. What made you want to make the jump?" Maya hesitated, not sure how much to share. "Honestly, I didn't choose it initially. I had to drop out of college when my father died and my mother got sick. The restaurant was supposed to be temporary, but temporary has a way of becoming permanent when you're just trying to survive." David nodded slowly. "I get that. I was working 3 jobs when Ethan found me: waiter, delivery driver, and overnight stock at a grocery store. I'd been trying to finish my associate's degree for 4 years, taking 1 or 2 classes a semester when I could afford it. He offered me a job and I thought he was insane or running some kind of scam." "What changed your mind?" "He gave me 2 weeks to think about it. No pressure. And during those 2 weeks, I realized that I was so busy protecting myself from potential failure that I'd stopped allowing myself any possibility of success. So I took the risk." David took a bite of his sandwich. "Best decision I ever made. But it was also the hardest year of my life." Maya felt a chill run through her. "Why?" "Because suddenly I was surrounded by people who'd had every advantage I hadn't: private schools, internships, family connections, confidence that came from never having to question whether they belonged. And I had to work twice as hard to prove I deserved to be in the same room. Ethan gave me the opportunity, but I had to earn the respect. Nobody hands you that part." "That's not exactly reassuring." "It's not meant to be reassuring. It's meant to be honest." David met her eyes. "You're going to have moments where you feel like you don't belong here, Maya, where you're going to want to quit because it's easier than fighting to prove yourself. And I'm telling you this now so that when those moments come, you remember. Everyone who's worth a damn in this building has felt that way at some point. The difference between the ones who make it and the ones who don't is whether they let that feeling win." Maya absorbed this, feeling the weight of what she'd committed to settling more heavily on her shoulders. "So," David continued, his tone lightening slightly, "think you can handle it?" "I don't know yet," Maya said honestly, "but I'm going to try." "Good answer. Come on, let's get you back upstairs. We've got a client presentation to prep for tomorrow, and I want you to sit in and observe." The afternoon was spent in a conference room with David and 2 other analysts, a woman named Priya, who had an MBA from Wharton, and a guy named Marcus who'd worked in investment banking before joining Hayes Collective. They were preparing a presentation for a potential client, a mid-sized tech company looking for strategic guidance on expanding into sustainable energy markets. Maya mostly observed, taking notes and trying to follow the rapid-fire discussion of market analysis, competitive positioning, and financial projections. Priya and Marcus spoke in a shorthand that clearly came from years of training and experience, referencing frameworks and theories that Maya had never heard of. She felt the inadequacy David had warned about creeping in, the sense that she was playing a game where everyone else knew the rules except her. But she also noticed something else. When David asked questions, he didn't accept the first answer. He pushed, probed, looked for the assumptions beneath the conclusions. And a few times, Maya caught herself thinking of follow-up questions before David asked them, not because she understood the technical details, but because she understood people, understood the gap between what someone said and what they meant. Late in the afternoon, Priya made a point about consumer behavior in the renewable energy market, citing a study about purchasing decisions. "The data shows that consumers prioritize cost over environmental impact by a factor of 3 to 1, Priya said, pulling up a slide with the relevant statistics. Something about it nagged at Maya. She glanced at her notes, then raised her hand slightly, a gesture left over from years of school. David noticed. "Maya? Question?" This might be a stupid question, but did that study control for income level?" Priya frowned. "What do you mean?" "I mean, If you ask someone who's struggling to pay their electric bill whether they'd pay more for renewable energy, they're going to say no. But that's not because they don't care about the environment. It's because they literally can't afford to care. It's not a values problem. It's an access problem. The room went quiet. Marcus exchanged a glance with Priya. She's right, David said slowly. The study Priya cited was general population, but it didn't segment by income bracket. If we're advising a client on market strategy, we need to be clear about whether we're targeting consumers who have choice or consumers who are making decisions under financial constraint. That's actually a really important distinction, Marcus admitted. If we're wrong about the motivation, we could be steering them toward the wrong market segment entirely. Priya nodded, looking at Maya with a new expression, not quite respect yet, but something close to it. Good catch. Maya felt a flush of warmth spread through her chest. It was a small thing, one observation in a 4-hour meeting, but it was proof that maybe, just maybe, she had something to offer here beyond just working hard. When the meeting ended, David pulled her aside. "That was good work in there," he said. "You saw something the rest of us missed because you've lived in a world where cost isn't just an abstract number on a spreadsheet. It's the difference between eating and not eating. That perspective is valuable, Maya. Don't lose it as you learn the technical stuff." "I won't," Maya promised. "Good. Now go home and get some rest. Tomorrow we're presenting to the client, and I want you there. You won't be speaking, but you'll be observing. Pay attention to how we translate analysis into narrative. That's the real skill, not just understanding the data, but making someone else care about it." Maya left the office at 6:30, exhausted but buzzing with a strange energy. The day had been overwhelming, intimidating, occasionally terrifying, but it had also been exhilarating in a way she'd forgotten work could be. On the subway ride home, she pulled out her phone and texted Ethan. "First day survived. Thank you for this chance." His response came a few minutes later. "Heard you asked a question in David's prep session that changed their entire approach. That's not surviving, Maya. That's thriving. Keep it up." She stared at the message, feeling something unfamiliar and fragile bloom in her chest. Pride. Not the defensive pride that came from proving people wrong, but the quiet pride of knowing she'd contributed something worthwhile. When she got home, her mother had dinner waiting. Nothing fancy, just pasta and salad, but made with care. "How was it?" her mother asked as Maya collapsed into a chair. "Hard, really hard, but also good. I think I can do this, Mom." Her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "I never doubted it for a second." That night, Maya lay in bed running through the day's events, her mind still racing. She thought about David's warning that the hard part was just beginning, about the moment in the meeting when she'd spoken up and been taken seriously, about Ethan's text message sitting on her phone like a validation she hadn't realized she needed. She thought about the empty chair at Marcello's, and how Ethan had sat there alone for 8 months waiting for someone to ask the right question. And she thought about how sometimes the bravest thing you could do wasn't choosing between safety and risk. It was choosing to believe that you deserved the chance to find out which one would actually save you. Outside her window, the city hummed with its usual chaos. Thousands of stories unfolding simultaneously, thousands of people navigating their own versions of this exact moment. But this story, this particular impossible, terrifying story, was hers. And for the first time in 4 years, Maya let herself believe it might actually have a happy ending. The weeks that followed blurred together in a rhythm Maya had never experienced before. Challenging but not crushing, demanding but not impossible. She arrived at the office each morning at 8:15, spent her lunch break studying industry reports David recommended, and stayed until 6:30 most evenings, soaking up everything she could learn. The work pushed her in ways that waiting tables never had, forcing her to think strategically, to question assumptions, to see patterns in data that told stories about human behavior and market forces. But it wasn't easy. There were moments when she sat in meetings listening to Priya or Marcus discuss portfolio theory or market segmentation strategies using terminology that might as well have been a foreign language. There were nights when she came home so mentally exhausted that she could barely eat dinner before collapsing on the couch. And there were quiet moments of doubt, usually around 3 in the afternoon when her energy flagged and the voice in her head whispered that she was out of her depth, that eventually someone would realize she didn't belong here. David seemed to sense those moments. He'd appear at her desk with coffee, drop a new assignment in front of her, and say something like, "Stop overthinking and start doing. That's how you learn." It became a pattern. The doubt would creep in, David would push her forward, and Maya would discover she was capable of more than she'd given herself credit for. 3 weeks into her new job, on a gray December morning that threatened snow, David called her into his office. "Close the door," he said, not looking up from his computer. Maya's stomach dropped. In her experience, closed-door conversations with supervisors rarely ended well. She sat down in the chair across from his desk and tried to keep her expression neutral. David finished whatever he was typing, then turned to face her fully. "How do you think you're doing?" The question caught her off guard. I think I'm learning. There's still a lot I don't understand, but I'm working on it." That's a diplomatic answer. Let me rephrase. Do you think you're meeting expectations? Maya's throat tightened. This was it, the moment she'd been dreading. He was going to tell her it wasn't working out, that they'd made a mistake, that she should probably start looking for something more suited to her background. "I'm trying my best," she said quietly. David leaned back in his chair, studying her. "Maya, I'm not asking because I think you're failing. I'm asking because I want to know if you recognize how well you're actually doing." She blinked. "What?" "In 3 weeks, you've absorbed information that takes most new analysts 3 months to process. You ask better questions than people who've been here for years. Your instincts about human behavior and market dynamics are sharper than anyone I've worked with. And yesterday, when you caught that error in the Silverman proposal, the one about projected adoption rates in rural markets, you saved us from presenting flawed data to a client who would have eaten us alive." Maya remembered the moment. She'd been reviewing the proposal at her desk, noticed that the demographic data didn't align with the consumption patterns they were projecting, and had mentioned it to David almost apologetically. He'd spent the next 2 hours reworking the entire section. "I just noticed something seemed off," Maya said. "Exactly, you noticed. Do you know how many people would have missed that because they were too focused on making the numbers look good or too intimidated to question senior analysts' work?" David shook his head. "You're not just meeting expectations, Maya. You're exceeding them. And I need you to know that because we're about to make your life significantly more complicated." "How?" "Ethan wants you on the Meridian project." Maya had heard about Meridian in passing, something about a major client presentation scheduled for mid-January, one of the biggest pitches Hayes Collective had taken on in the past year. It involved a healthcare technology company looking to expand into underserved markets, and the contract was worth several $1 million in consulting fees. "But I've only been here 3 weeks, Maya said. "Surely there are people more qualified." "There are people with more experience," David corrected. "But Ethan specifically requested you. He thinks your perspective on accessibility and economic barriers will be crucial for developing a strategy that actually works instead of just looking good on paper." The weight of that statement settled over Maya like a heavy coat. Ethan was trusting her with something important, something that could impact the company's reputation and bottom line. It was validating and terrifying in equal measure. "When does it start?" "Tomorrow. Team meeting at 9 a.m., conference room B. I'll be there, along with Priya, Marcus, and 2 senior partners, Linda Okoye and James Morrison. They're both brilliant and both very protective of their projects, so prepare yourself for intense scrutiny." Maya nodded, her mind already racing ahead to everything she'd need to review before the meeting. "One more thing," David said, his tone shifting to something more personal. "You're going to walk into that room tomorrow and feel like you don't belong there. Everyone else will have years of experience you don't have, degrees from schools you couldn't afford, networks you've never had access to. And you're going to be tempted to stay quiet, to just observe, and not risk saying something wrong. But that would be a waste of why Ethan put you on this team. He didn't choose you despite your background, Maya. He chose you because of it. So when that voice in your head tells you to stay quiet, ignore it, speak up, ask the questions no one else is asking. That's your job." The Meridian team meeting the next morning was exactly as intimidating as David had warned. Maya arrived 10 minutes early and found the conference room already occupied by 2 people she'd only seen in passing. Linda Okoye, a tall woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and an air of absolute competence, and James Morrison, a younger man, maybe mid-30s, whose casual confidence suggested he'd never questioned his place in any room he entered. "You must be Maya," Linda said, extending her hand. "David speaks highly of you." "That's generous of him. I'm still learning." "Aren't we all?" Linda's smile was warm but assessing. "I understand you come from a non-traditional background." It wasn't quite a question, but Maya heard the curiosity beneath it. "I do. I was working in food service before this." "Interesting. We don't get many people from that world in strategic consulting." James's tone was neutral, but Maya couldn't tell if he meant it as an observation or a judgment. Before she could respond, David, Priya, and Marcus arrived, followed shortly by Ethan. Maya hadn't seen him much since starting. He'd been traveling for the past 2 weeks, and their interactions had been limited to occasional emails and one brief conversation in the elevator about how she was settling in. He looked tired this morning, she noticed. There were shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before, and his usually crisp appearance seemed slightly worn around the edges. "Morning, everyone," Ethan said, settling into a chair at the head of the table. "Thanks for making time. I know we're all juggling multiple priorities, but Meridian is critical. If we land this contract, it positions us as a serious player in healthcare technology strategy. If we lose it, we've wasted 3 months of development work and damaged our reputation with the sector we're trying to break into." He pulled up a presentation on the screen. Meridian Health Technologies currently serves primarily urban and suburban markets with their telemedicine platform. They want to expand into rural and underserved areas, but their previous attempts failed because they didn't understand the actual barriers their target users face. They're coming to us because they need a strategy built on reality, not assumptions. Linda spoke up. "What's their timeline?" "Aggressive. They want our full proposal and implementation roadmap by January 15th. That gives us 4 weeks to research, develop, and pitch a comprehensive strategy." James whistled low. "That's barely enough time to do preliminary research, let alone build a full strategy." "Which is why I'm putting our strongest team on it," Ethan said. He looked around the table. "Linda, you'll lead the market analysis. James, you're handling the technology integration piece. David's managing the overall project coordination. Priya and Marcus, you're on competitive analysis and financial modeling, respectively." His gaze settled on Maya. "And Maya is going to do something different. I want you conducting primary research, talking to people in the communities Meridian wants to serve. Find out what the actual barriers are, why previous platforms failed. What would make someone in a rural area with limited internet access and high healthcare costs trust a telemedicine service enough to use it?" The assignment was both thrilling and daunting. Maya had spent years working with people from exactly those demographics, customers at Marcello's, neighbors in her building, her own mother navigating a healthcare system that seemed designed to exclude people without resources. But translating that lived experience into strategic recommendations for a corporate client was something else entirely. "How do I conduct that research?" Maya asked. "However you think will get you the most honest answers," Ethan said. "Surveys, interviews, focus groups. Use whatever methods make sense. David will help you design the research framework, but the approach is up to you." For the next 2 hours, they discussed the project in detail. Deliverables, timelines, division of responsibilities, potential obstacles. Maya took notes furiously, trying to keep track of all the moving pieces while also thinking about how she'd approach the research assignment. When the meeting finally ended and people began filing out, Ethan caught her eye. "Maya, can you stay for a minute?" She nodded, gathering her things more slowly as the others left. When the door closed behind David, the last one out, Ethan rubbed his eyes and sighed. "Rough couple of weeks," Maya ventured. "You could say that. Oliver had the flu, which meant I was working from home while also playing nurse. Not my finest balancing act." He managed a tired smile. "But that's not why I wanted to talk to you. How are you really doing? And I want an honest answer, not the professional version you'd give David or Linda." Maya considered the question. "It's overwhelming sometimes. Like I'm constantly one step behind everyone else trying to catch up to a standard I can't quite see. But it's also the most engaged I've felt in years. Like my brain is finally getting used in ways it was meant to." "That's a good answer. Better than fine, anyway." Ethan leaned against the table. "I put you on this project because I think you can see things the rest of the team can't. But I also put you on it because I remember what it's like to be new to this world and feel like you're constantly proving yourself. having a high-profile project where your contribution matters. That's how you stop feeling like an imposter and start feeling like you belong. What if I fail? Then we learn from it and move forward. Maya, I didn't hire you because I thought you'd be perfect. I hired you because I thought you'd be valuable. There's a difference. The word settled something in Maya's chest that had been unsettled since the meeting started. Thank you for the opportunity and for being honest about what it means. Just do good work. That's all I ask. He pushed off from the table. Now go talk to David about research design before he hunts you down. He gets anxious when projects don't have clear methodologies. The next 3 weeks consumed Maya's life in a way that made her previous schedule at Marcello's look leisurely by comparison. She spent her days designing surveys and interview protocols, her evenings conducting phone interviews with people in rural communities across 3 different states, and her weekends analyzing the data she'd collected. David had helped her develop a research framework that was rigorous enough to satisfy academic standards while still being flexible enough to capture the nuanced, complicated realities of people's lives. What emerged from the research was a picture that contradicted almost everything Meridian's previous market analysis had assumed. The barrier to adoption wasn't primarily cost, though that mattered, and it wasn't skepticism about telemedicine as a concept. It was trust. People in underserved communities had been promised solutions before by companies and organizations that swept in with ambitious plans and then disappeared when the initiatives didn't generate immediate profits. They'd been treated as a market to extract value from, not a community to serve. And they'd learned, through bitter experience, to be suspicious of anything that sounded too good to be true. Maya documented all of this in meticulous detail. Quotes from interviews, statistical patterns from surveys, case studies of previous failed initiatives, and what they'd gotten wrong. She worked late into the nights, fueled by coffee and the growing conviction that she'd found something important. On the 15th night of the project, a Saturday evening when most people were out enjoying their weekends, Maya was still at the office, deep in her analysis, when she heard footsteps approaching her desk. She looked up to find Ethan standing there, dressed casually in jeans and a sweater, with Oliver beside him holding what appeared to be takeout bags. "You're here late," Ethan observed. Maya glanced at the clock and was startled to see it was nearly 8. "I didn't realize how late it had gotten. I was just finishing up the analysis section." "Have you eaten?" I think I had something at lunch." Ethan shook his head. "Oliver and I just picked up Thai food. There's more than enough. Join us?" It wasn't really a question, and Maya found herself following them to Ethan's office, where Oliver immediately started unpacking containers of pad thai, spring rolls, and green curry onto the coffee table. "Why are you working on a Saturday?" Oliver asked, handing Maya a plate. "Because I have a big project due soon, and I want to make sure it's really good." "Dad works on Saturdays sometimes too. I tell him it's boring." "Oliver," Ethan said mildly, "but it is boring. We could be at the park or the museum or literally anywhere else." "He's not wrong," Maya said, suppressing a smile. They ate together in Ethan's office, and Maya was struck by how normal it felt. Not a CEO and an employee, but just 3 people sharing a meal and conversation. Oliver chattered about his upcoming birthday party, about a science project he was working on, about how his friend Emma had a pet hamster and he wanted one too, but his dad said they'd talk about it later. "Later means no," Oliver confided to Maya in a stage whisper. "Later means we'll discuss it when you've demonstrated consistent responsibility for your current obligations," Ethan corrected. "Like keeping your room clean for more than 2 consecutive days." "That's basically impossible. Nobody can keep their room clean for 2 whole days." "Then I guess we won't be discussing hamsters anytime soon." Maya laughed, and the sound surprised her. When was the last time she'd laughed at work? When was the last time work had felt like something other than a test she was constantly taking? After they finished eating, Oliver pulled out a tablet and settled onto the couch to watch something with headphones, leaving Maya and Ethan at the table with the remains of their meal. "He likes you," Ethan said quietly. "He doesn't usually warm up to people that quickly. He's a great kid. You're doing a good job with him." "Some days I'm not so sure. Single parenting is mostly improvisation and hoping you're not screwing them up too badly." He paused. "How's the Meridian research going?" "I think I found something important. The previous market analysis focused on demographics and income levels, but they missed the trust issue completely. These communities have been burned before by initiatives that promised to help, but really just wanted to extract data or turn them into a market segment without actually serving their needs. Ethan leaned forward, his full attention on her now. Can you quantify that? Yes. I've got data showing a direct correlation between community exposure to previous failed healthcare initiatives and resistance to new platforms, even when the new platforms are objectively better and more affordable. It's not rational skepticism, it's learned wariness. And unless Meridian addresses that specifically, they're going to fail again no matter how good their technology is. That's exactly the kind of insight we need, Ethan said. What's your recommendation? Maya had been working on this part for days, and she felt confident in her conclusion. Meridian needs to build trust before they build market share. That means partnering with existing community organizations, hiring local people as community health advocates, making long-term commitments to areas they serve instead of pulling out if adoption is slow. It means treating this as a mission instead of just a market opportunity. That's going to be a harder sell than a traditional market expansion strategy. I know, but it's the truth. And if we pitch them something that sounds good in a boardroom but doesn't work in reality, we're just contributing to the same cycle of failure we're supposed to be helping them break. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. You really believe that? I do. These aren't just data points to me, Ethan. They're people like my mother, like my neighbors, like the customers I served for 3 years who couldn't afford the healthcare they needed and didn't trust the systems that were supposed to help them. If we're going to do this work, we should do it right. Something shifted in Ethan's expression. Respect, maybe, or recognition. Then that's what we'll pitch. Build your recommendations around that framework. I'll back you. The trust implicit in that statement staggered Maya. He was willing to stake the project, and by extension the company's reputation, on her analysis and judgment. That wasn't just an opportunity. It was a profound act of faith. Thank you, she said, her voice rough with emotion she didn't quite know how to name. Don't thank me yet. We still have to convince Linda and James, and they're going to push back hard on anything that sounds idealistic instead of pragmatic. Then I'll make sure it sounds pragmatic, because it is. Trust building isn't just good ethics. It's good business. It just takes longer to show returns than traditional market penetration strategies. Ethan smiled. There's the consultant in you emerging. Keep that energy for the presentation. Oliver looked up from his tablet. Dad, it's 8:30. You said we'd be home by 8. You're right, buddy. Let's pack up. Ethan stood and started gathering the takeout containers. Maya, don't stay too much longer. The work will be here tomorrow. I won't. Just want to finish this one section. After they left, Maya sat in the quiet office and let herself absorb what had just happened. She'd shared a meal with her boss and his son. She'd presented her research findings and been taken seriously. She'd been trusted with something that mattered. 3 months ago, she'd been a waitress counting tips and wondering how she'd make rent. Now she was building strategy for a multi-million-dollar healthcare initiative. The transformation was so complete, so total, that it sometimes felt like it had happened to someone else. But it hadn't. It had happened to her, because she'd been brave enough to ask a question, and because someone had been paying attention when she did. The final week before the Meridian presentation was brutal. The team worked 12-hour days refining every aspect of the pitch: market analysis, financial projections, technology integration plans, implementation timelines. Linda and James had indeed pushed back on Maya's trust-building framework, arguing it was too soft, too slow, too difficult to measure. But Maya had come prepared. She'd built a quantitative model showing projected adoption rates under traditional market penetration versus community partnership approaches, using data from similar initiatives in healthcare and education. The numbers were clear. The trust-building approach had lower first-year adoption, but significantly higher long-term retention and organic growth. Over a 5-year period, it outperformed aggressive market penetration by nearly 40%. It's the difference between creating customers and creating advocates, Maya had explained during a particularly heated team meeting. Customers churn when something better comes along. Advocates build your market for you because they believe in what you're doing. Linda had studied the model for a long time before nodding slowly. This is solid work, Maya. I'm impressed. Coming from Linda, who Maya had learned was notoriously difficult to impress, the compliment meant everything. The presentation itself was scheduled for January 14th at 2 in the afternoon at Meridian's headquarters across town. The team would present to Meridian's executive board 7 people who would decide whether Hayes Collective's strategy was worth several $1,000,000 in consulting fees. The night before, Maya barely slept. She ran through her sections of the presentation in her head, anticipated questions, practiced her responses. She'd be presenting the community research findings and the trust-building framework, arguably the most controversial but also the most crucial part of their proposal. When morning came, she dressed in her best suit, one she'd bought just for this presentation using part of her first real paycheck, and met the team in the Hayes Collective lobby at noon. Ethan appeared a few minutes later, and Maya was startled by his appearance. He looked different somehow, sharper, more intense, the casual warmth she'd glimpsed during their Thai food dinner replaced by the focused energy of someone about to walk into battle. "Everyone ready?" he asked, his gaze sweeping across the team. A chorus of affirmatives, though Maya noticed Priya's hands were shaking slightly as she gathered her materials. Even veterans got nervous before high-stakes presentations. The car ride to Meridian's office was quiet, everyone lost in their own preparation. Maya stared out the window at the city sliding past and tried to channel her nervousness into focus. When they arrived, they were ushered into a sleek conference room with a view of the river. The Meridian executive team filed in shortly after, 6 men and 1 woman, all dressed in expensive suits, all carrying the kind of confidence that came from being successful enough to hire consultants like Hayes Collective. The presentation began with Linda's market analysis, followed by James on technology integration, then Priya on competitive landscape, Marcus on financial projections. Each section was polished, professional, backed by rigorous data. Then it was Maya's turn. She stood, connected her laptop to the presentation system, and pulled up her first slide, a quote from one of her interview subjects, a woman in rural Kentucky who'd explained why she didn't use the previous telemedicine service despite it being free. "They came in here talking about how we needed help, like we were problems to be solved instead of people to be served. Soon as the grant money ran out, they disappeared, left us with a broken website and a lot of promises they never kept." Maya let the quote sit for a moment before speaking. "This is the reality you're facing when you try to enter underserved markets. It's not that people don't want better healthcare access. It's that they've learned not to trust organizations that promise it. And unless you address that trust deficit directly, no amount of good technology or competitive pricing will matter." She walked them through her research, the interviews, the survey data, the patterns that emerged. She showed them the quantitative model, demonstrating how trust-building strategies outperform traditional approaches over time. She presented case studies from other industries where community partnership models had succeeded, and then she made her core recommendation. Meridian has an opportunity to do something different, not to enter these markets as a vendor, but to enter as a partner. That means hiring community health advocates from the areas you serve. It means partnering with local clinics and community organizations who already have trust. It means making long-term commitments even when short-term adoption is slower than your investors might like. It means treating this as a mission to serve rather than just a market to capture. One of the executives, a man in his 50s with steel gray hair, interrupted. "That sounds expensive and slow. What's the ROI timeline?" Maya had expected this question. Year 1, you'll see slower adoption rates than aggressive market penetration. But by year 3, you'll have retention rates above 90%, organic growth through community referrals, and significantly lower customer acquisition costs because your advocates are doing your marketing for you. Over 5 years, the community partnership model delivers 42% higher revenue than traditional penetration with substantially better brand reputation and market positioning. She pulled up the slide with the comparative financial models. These aren't aspirational numbers. They're based on real data from similar initiatives in healthcare, education, and financial services. The question isn't whether this approach works. The question is whether you're willing to invest in building something sustainable instead of something fast. The room was silent. Maya couldn't read the executives' expressions. Some looked skeptical, some thoughtful. One woman at the end of the table was nodding slowly. "Thank you," the CEO finally said. "That's a provocative analysis. We'll need to discuss internally and get back to you." The presentation concluded with Ethan's closing remarks about implementation timelines and next steps. Then it was over, and they were back in the car heading to the office. And Maya's adrenaline was crashing hard. "How do you think it went?" she asked David quietly. "Honestly, I have no idea. They kept their cards pretty close." Back at the office, the team dispersed to their respective areas, and Maya sank into her desk chair feeling simultaneously exhausted and wired. She'd done everything she could. Now it was just waiting. An hour later, Ethan appeared at her desk. "Walk with me," he said. They took the elevator down to the building's lobby, then stepped outside into the January cold. Ethan didn't speak until they'd walked half a block. "That was exceptional work in there," he said finally. "The research, the presentation, the way you handled the ROI question, all of it. You made a case for doing the right thing that was also a case for doing the smart thing. That's rare." "I just told them what the data showed." "No, you told them what the data meant. That's different." He stopped walking and turned to face her. "Maya, regardless of whether we land this contract, you proved something important today. You proved you belong in that room, not as the diversity hire or the charity case or the person who got lucky, but as someone who brings real value because of what you know and how you think." The words hit Maya harder than she expected. She'd spent the past 2 months fighting against the voice in her head that said she didn't deserve to be here, that eventually someone would realize she was faking her way through. And here was Ethan, the person whose opinion mattered most, telling her that voice was wrong. "Thank you," she managed, "for giving me the chance to prove it. You gave yourself the chance when you said yes to something terrifying. I just opened the door." They walked back to the office in companionable silence, and Maya felt something shift inside her, a letting go of the fear that she didn't belong, replaced by the quiet certainty that she'd earned her place here. Not because someone had handed it to her, but because she'd done the work. The call came 2 days later on a Thursday afternoon. Maya was at her desk reviewing data for a different project when her phone buzzed with a text from Ethan. "Conference room B, now." She practically ran to the conference room, her heart hammering. The entire Meridian team was already there. David, Priya, Marcus, Linda, James, and Ethan at the head of the table with his laptop open. "Meridian just called," Ethan said without preamble. "They're accepting our proposal. Full contract, everything we recommended including the community partnership framework. They want to start implementation in March." The room erupted. Priya hugged Marcus, Linda let out a whoop that was completely at odds with her usual composure, David was grinning so widely, Maya thought his face might split. And Ethan was looking directly at Maya with an expression of such pride and satisfaction that she felt tears prick her eyes. "They specifically mentioned the community research as the deciding factor," Ethan continued. "Said it was the first time anyone had shown them a strategy based on real understanding instead of market assumptions. So this is Maya's win as much as anyone's." The team turned to her, and suddenly Maya was being congratulated and thanked and pulled into a hug by Linda, who whispered, "You did good, kid. Really good." Later, after the celebration had died down and people had returned to their desks, Maya found herself alone in the conference room, staring out at the city below. She thought about the version of herself who'd stood outside this building 2 months ago, terrified and uncertain. She thought about the empty chair at Marcello's and the question that had changed everything. She thought about how sometimes the bravest thing you could do was believe you were worth the chance someone offered you. And she thought about how that belief, once you found it, could transform not just your circumstances, but who you understood yourself to be. The door opened behind her. "Ethan." "You okay?" he asked. "Yeah, just taking it in." He came to stand beside her at the window. "You know what the best part of this is?" "What?" "This is just the beginning. You're going to do a lot more work like this, Maya. Work that matters. Work that makes a difference. And you're going to be brilliant at it." She turned to look at him, this man who'd seen something in her when she couldn't see it in herself, and felt gratitude so profound it ached. "I won't let you down," she promised. "I know you won't. But more importantly, I think you know it too now." And standing there in the fading afternoon light, looking out at a city that had once felt hostile and is now felt full of possibility, Maya realized he was right. She did know. Finally, after years of doubt and struggle and believing she wasn't enough, she knew. The success of the Meridian project changed something fundamental in how Maya moved through the world. It wasn't just that people at Hayes Collective treated her differently, though they did, with a respect that felt earned rather than polite. It was that she treated herself differently. The constant internal questioning, the waiting for someone to expose her as a fraud, the apologizing for taking up space, all of it began to fade like morning fog burning off under sunlight. February brought new projects, new challenges, new opportunities to prove that Meridian hadn't been a fluke. David assigned her to an infrastructure development proposal for a nonprofit focused on clean water access. Linda pulled her into a strategy session for a client in sustainable agriculture. Even James, who'd been skeptical of her at first, started seeking her input on community engagement frameworks for his tech clients. Maya's apartment changed too. Her first real paycheck had allowed her to pay off the overdue utility bills, catch up on rent, and cover her mother's medications without the stomach-churning anxiety of choosing which necessity to prioritize. The second paycheck brought small luxuries, new sheets that weren't threadbare, groceries that included fresh vegetables, a winter coat that actually kept her warm. By the third paycheck, she'd started looking at her own apartments, places where she could have a bedroom again instead of the living room couch. Her mother noticed the transformation. One evening in late February, as they sat together after dinner, her mother reached across the table and squeezed her hand. "You're different now," her mother said softly. "Lighter somehow. Like you've been carrying something heavy for so long that you forgot what it felt like to set it down." Maya felt her throat tighten. "I didn't realize how much weight I was carrying until I didn't have to anymore. I'm proud of you, sweetheart. Not because of the job or the success, though those are wonderful. I'm proud because you took a chance on yourself when it would have been easier to stay safe. That takes real courage." The conversation stayed with Maya as the weeks progressed, a reminder that the journey she'd been on wasn't just about professional advancement. It was about reclaiming parts of herself she'd had to suppress just to survive. But with the new confidence came a complication she hadn't anticipated. Ethan. They'd been working closely together since Meridian. Weekly check-ins on her projects, occasional strategy sessions, the odd lunch meeting to discuss her career development. And somewhere in the professional interactions, Maya had started noticing things that had nothing to do with business. The way Ethan's entire demeanor softened when Oliver called during the workday. The dry humor that emerged when he was relaxed. The moments of vulnerability when he talked about the challenges of single parenthood or building a company that honored his late wife's values. She noticed, and she tried very hard not to notice that she was noticing. Because this was exactly the kind of complication that could destroy everything she'd built. Ethan was her boss, her mentor, the person who'd given her this opportunity. Getting tangled up in feelings, even if those feelings were mutual, which she had no evidence they were, would be catastrophically stupid. So Maya did what she'd always done when facing something she couldn't control. She threw herself into work harder than ever, stayed late at the office to avoid her own thoughts, and maintained the most professional demeanor she could manage. It worked, mostly, until Oliver's birthday party. The invitation had come in early February, a colorful card that Oliver had apparently designed himself, with hand-drawn dinosaurs and his name spelled out in glitter glue. The party was scheduled for the first Saturday in March at a children's museum, and Oliver had written a personal note at the bottom. "You promised you'd come if you were free. Please, please, please be free." Maya had showed the invitation to David, half hoping he'd tell her it was inappropriate to attend a social event involving her CEO's family. Instead, David had grinned. "Oh, you're definitely going. Oliver will never forgive you if you don't. And honestly, neither will Ethan. The kid's been talking about inviting you for weeks." So, Maya found herself on a Saturday afternoon in early March, walking into the Children's Museum carrying a carefully wrapped present, a book about dinosaurs she'd spent an embarrassing amount of time selecting, and trying to calm her nerves. The party was already in full swing when she arrived. A group of 7-year-olds raced through the museum's hands-on exhibits with the focused chaos only children could achieve. Parents clustered in small groups, making conversation while keeping one eye on their offspring. And in the center of it all was Ethan, looking more relaxed than Maya had ever seen him, laughing at something another parent had said while simultaneously preventing 2 kids from dismantling what appeared to be a carefully constructed tower of blocks. Oliver spotted her first. "Maya, you came!" He barreled toward her with enough force that she had to brace herself for the impact of his hug. "Of course I came. I promised, didn't I? Dad said you might be too busy with work stuff." Your dad underestimated how much I wanted to see the dinosaur exhibit. Oliver's face lit up. You like dinosaurs? I used to love them when I was your age. Had a whole collection of dinosaur books. Then you have to come see the T-Rex. Come on! Oliver grabbed her hand and started pulling her toward one of the exhibits. Maya glanced back at Ethan, who'd noticed her arrival and was watching the interaction with an expression she couldn't quite read. She gave him a small wave, and he returned it with a smile that made her stomach do something complicated before Oliver's enthusiastic tugging demanded her full attention. The next hour passed in a blur of exhibits, games, and conversations with 7-year-olds who had strong opinions about everything from the best dinosaur, still Spinosaurus according to Oliver, though he had competition from a girl named Sophia who insisted it was obviously Triceratops, to whether pizza or tacos were the superior food. Pizza won by a narrow margin. Maya found herself genuinely enjoying it. The uncomplicated joy of children, the simple pleasure of being present for something that had nothing to do with work or stress or proving herself. It was a kind of lightness she'd almost forgotten existed. When the kids were shepherded into a separate room for cake and presents, Maya found herself standing near the windows with a small group of parents. A woman about her age, who'd introduced herself as Emma's mom, struck up a conversation. So how do you know Ethan and Oliver? Maya hesitated, not sure how to explain. I work at Ethan's company. Oliver invited me to the party. That's sweet. Ethan doesn't usually mix work and personal life. You must be special. Before Maya could figure out how to respond to that, another parent, a father she hadn't met, chimed in. Are you the one who worked on that healthcare project? The Meridian thing? Yes. How did you know about that? Ethan mentioned it at the last school fundraiser. He was pretty impressed with the work you did. Said it was some of the most insightful community analysis he'd seen in years. Heat crept up Maya's neck. The idea that Ethan had been talking about her work in social settings to people who had nothing to do with Hayes Collective felt both flattering and deeply uncomfortable. He's generous with praise, Maya said, trying to deflect. He's really not, actually, Emma's mom said. Ethan's one of the most measured people I know. If he's impressed, he means it. The conversation shifted to other topics, school events, local politics, someone's upcoming vacation, but Maya's mind stayed caught on the revelation that Ethan had been talking about her work, in context that suggested she'd made an impression beyond just being another employee. She was still processing this when Ethan appeared at her elbow, 2 bottles of water in hand. You look like you could use this, he said, offering her one. Thanks. That obvious? You've been cornered by the parent committee for 15 minutes. Anyone would need hydration after that. His tone was light, teasing in a way she'd rarely heard from him at work. They moved slightly away from the group, finding a quieter spot near one of the exhibits. Thank you for coming, Ethan said. It means a lot to Oliver. He's been talking about it all week. I wouldn't have missed it. He's a great kid. He is. Even when he's trying to convince me that hamsters are low-maintenance pets. Ethan shook his head. I swear he thinks I've never encountered the internet and can't fact-check his claims. Maya laughed. To be fair, his negotiation tactics are pretty sophisticated for a 7-year-old. Don't encourage him. He's already too good at finding loopholes in house rules. They stood in comfortable silence for a moment, watching through the window as Oliver opened presents with his friends, his face alight with uncomplicated happiness. Can I ask you something? Ethan said, his tone shifting to something more serious. Of course. Are you happy? At Hayes Collective, I mean. I know the work is demanding, and I want to make sure you're not just enduring it. The question caught Maya off guard. I'm not just enduring it. I'm thriving. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm using my brain the way it's meant to be used, like I'm contributing to something that matters. Good. That's what I hoped. He paused, seeming to wrestle with something. I also want to make sure I haven't put you in an uncomfortable position. With the mentorship, the project assignments, sometimes I worry that the dynamic is too complicated. Maya understood what he wasn't quite saying. The power imbalance, the fact that he'd hired her, the potential for things to become messy if boundaries weren't carefully maintained. You've been nothing but professional, Maya said carefully. And you've given me opportunities I never would have had otherwise. If there's any discomfort, it's just me adjusting to not having to fight for everything anymore. Ethan nodded, but something in his expression suggested he wasn't entirely satisfied with the answer. Before he could say anything else, Oliver burst through the door, trailing a gaggle of friends. Dad! Maya! We're doing the scavenger hunt now. Maya, you have to be on my team. The moment passed, but it left Maya with questions she didn't know how to answer. The party wrapped up an hour later with goodbyes and thank yous and promises to arrange playdates. Maya helped Ethan carry presents and party supplies to his car, a practical sedan that somehow managed to be both expensive and understated. Let me give you a ride home, Ethan offered as they loaded the last box into the trunk. It's the least I can do after you spent your Saturday at a 7-year-old's birthday party. I can take the subway. Maya, please. I'm going that direction anyway. She relented, partly because it was cold and getting dark, partly because she wasn't quite ready for the day to end. Oliver chattered from the back seat for most of the drive, narrating every aspect of his party and ranking his presents in order of awesomeness. The dinosaur book Maya had given him placed third, which Oliver assured her was really good because first and second were Lego sets and everyone knows Legos are the best. When they reached Maya's building, a walk-up in a neighborhood that was trying very hard to gentrify, Oliver had finally worn himself out and dozed off, his head lolling against the window. Thank you for the ride, Maya said, gathering her things. And thank you for including me today. It was really special. Maya, wait. Ethan's voice stopped her as she reached for the door handle. I need to say something, and I need you to just listen until I'm finished. Can you do that? Her heart started hammering. Okay. Ethan took a breath, his hands gripping the steering wheel. When I offered you that job 3 months ago, it was because I saw potential in you that reminded me of people I've worked with who've gone on to do extraordinary things. That's still true. But somewhere between then and now, something shifted. I started looking forward to our meetings for reasons that have nothing to do with work. I started noticing things about you that have nothing to do with your analytical skills or your work ethic, and I need you to know that while also being very clear that I'm not going to act on it. Maya's breath caught. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm trying very hard to maintain appropriate boundaries, but I also don't want to be dishonest about what's happening. You deserve to know where I stand so you can decide where you want to stand. If you need me to be more distant professionally, I will. If you want to transfer to a different supervisor, I'll make that happen without any negative impact on your career. I just need you to know that the feelings exist while also understanding that I'm not expecting or asking for anything. The confession hung in the air between them, vulnerable and terrifying and honest in a way that made Maya's chest ache. I don't want to transfer, Maya said quietly, and I don't want you to be more distant, but I also don't know what to do with what you just told me. You don't have to do anything with it. I just needed you to know. Ethan finally looked at her, and the raw honesty in his expression nearly undid her. The last thing I want is to jeopardize what you've built at Hayes Collective. Your success there is entirely your own, Maya. It has nothing to do with anything I feel or don't feel. I need you to believe that. I do believe it, Maya said, but Ethan, you don't have to say anything else. I've already said too much. He glanced back at Oliver, still sleeping peacefully. Go get some rest. I'll see you Monday. Maya nodded, not trusting her voice, and got out of the car. She stood on the sidewalk and watched him drive away, her mind spinning with everything he'd said, and everything she hadn't been able to say back. That night, lying in bed staring at the ceiling, Maya forced herself to think through what had just happened with clear eyes. Ethan had feelings for her. She had feelings for him. Feelings she'd been trying very hard not to acknowledge because they felt dangerous and complicated. And now those feelings were out in the open, at least between the two of them, creating a situation that could either deepen into something meaningful or explode into something that destroyed everything she'd worked for. The smart thing, the safe thing, would be to maintain strict professional distance, to thank him for his honesty and make it clear that nothing could happen while she worked for him, to protect her career and her hard-won stability by refusing to risk them on something as unpredictable as feelings. But Maya was beginning to realize that she was tired of always choosing the safe thing. The question was whether she was brave enough to choose something else. The answer came to her slowly over the next 2 weeks. She watched Ethan during meetings, noticed the careful distance he maintained, the way he was scrupulously professional, even as she caught him watching her when he thought she wasn't looking. She noticed how her heart still jumped when he walked into a room, how conversations with him felt different from conversations with anyone else. charged with something unspoken but undeniable. And she noticed something else. The power dynamic she'd worried about felt less relevant now than it had 3 months ago. She'd proven herself at Hayes Collective, earned her place through work that had nothing to do with Ethan's feelings. She had other advocates in the company: David, Linda, even James. If she left Hayes Collective tomorrow, she'd have a resume that could get her hired anywhere in the industry. She wasn't dependent on Ethan's approval anymore. And that changed the equation. The realization crystallized on a Wednesday in late March. Maya had been working late on a proposal, and most of the office had cleared out by 7. She was packing up her things when she noticed lights still on in Ethan's office. She stood in her cubicle for a long moment, her coat in her hands, making a decision. Then she walked to his office and knocked on the open door. Ethan looked up from his computer, surprise flickering across his face. "Maya, I thought you'd left." "I was about to. Can I come in?" "Of course." She closed the door behind her, a gesture that felt significant, and sat in the chair across from his desk. "I've been thinking about what you said in the car," Maya began, "and I need you to know something." Ethan set down his pen, giving her his full attention. "I'm listening." "When you offered me this job, I was drowning. I'd spent 4 years in survival mode, and I'd forgotten what it felt like to have hope for anything beyond just making it through another month. You gave me a way out of that. But more than that, you saw something in me that I'd stopped seeing in myself, and I'll always be grateful for that." "Maya, let me finish." She took a breath, steadying herself. "For the first few months, I was terrified of doing anything that might jeopardize this opportunity, including acknowledging that somewhere along the way, working with you stopped being just professional and started being something else. Something I didn't know how to handle." Ethan's expression shifted, hope and caution warring in his eyes. "But I've realized something," Maya continued. "I'm not the person you hired 3 months ago. I've proven myself here. I have credibility that's mine, not just reflected from you. And while I understand the complications of what might happen if we acknowledge these feelings, I also understand that I'm tired of letting fear make my decisions for me." "What are you saying?" Maya met his gaze steadily. "I'm saying that I don't want to ignore this. I don't want to pretend that something isn't happening just because it's complicated, but I also don't want to do anything that compromises either of our positions at this company." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "If we do this, if we explore what this might be, we have to do it carefully, transparently. I won't have people thinking your success is anything other than earned." "I know. So what do we do?" "We start by changing the reporting structure. I'll talk to the board about having you report directly to Linda instead of through David and me. It'll be framed as a promotion, which it should be anyway, given your performance. That removes the direct supervisor relationship." Maya nodded slowly. "That makes sense. And we take this slowly. No grand gestures, no rushing into anything. We figure out if what we feel in a professional context translates to something real outside of it." "How do we do that?" A smile tugged at the corner of Ethan's mouth, the first genuine smile she'd seen from him in weeks. "We start with dinner, somewhere that's not the restaurant where we met, where we can just be two people getting to know each other without the weight of everything else." "That sounds terrifying." "It does," Ethan agreed, "but I think it might be worth it." Maya felt something loosen in her chest, the fear that had been holding her back for weeks finally releasing its grip. "Friday night?" "Friday night," Ethan confirmed. "I'll pick you up at 7. As Maya left his office, she felt the same sensation she'd experienced the night she'd sent that first text, accepting his job offer, the vertiginous thrill of stepping off a cliff and trusting that something would catch her on the way down. The difference was that this time, she wasn't just hoping to survive the fall. She was ready to see where it might take her. Friday arrived with the kind of nervous anticipation that made Maya change her outfit 3 times before finally settling on a simple black dress that felt appropriate for dinner without trying too hard. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror applying minimal makeup, just enough to feel put together, and caught her mother watching from the doorway with a knowing smile. "This isn't a work dinner, is it?" her mother asked. Maya felt heat creep up her neck. "What makes you say that?" "Because you've changed clothes 4 times, and you're wearing the perfume you save for special occasions. Also, you have that look." "What look?" "The one that says you're terrified and excited in equal measure." Her mother came into the bathroom and gently turned Maya to face her. Is this about Ethan? There was no judgment in the question, just curiosity and maternal concern. Maya had told her mother bits and pieces about the job, about the opportunities, about the mentorship. She hadn't mentioned the feelings that had developed, partly because she'd been trying not to acknowledge them herself. Yes, Maya admitted, we're having dinner as not colleagues, or at least trying to figure out if we can be something other than just colleagues. Her mother's expression softened. How do you feel about that? Honestly, scared. This could complicate everything I've built. If it goes wrong, I might have to leave Hayes Collective. And I love it there, Mom. I love the work, the challenges, the feeling that I'm finally doing something that matters. But, Maya sighed, but I also can't stop thinking about him. And not just as my boss or mentor. I think about the way he is with Oliver, the way he listens when I talk, the way he sees me as someone with value beyond just being useful. I think about how he took a chance on me when he had no reason to, and how he's never once made me feel like I owe him anything for it. That's not nothing, her mother said gently. Those are the qualities that matter, Maya. Not the complications or the risk, but whether someone makes you feel seen and valued and safe enough to be yourself. What if I'm making a mistake? Then you'll survive it. You've survived harder things than a relationship that doesn't work out. Her mother squeezed her shoulders. The question isn't whether it's safe. The question is whether it's worth the risk, and only you can answer that. The words stayed with Maya as she waited for Ethan to arrive, as she heard the knock on the door at precisely 7 o'clock, as she opened it to find him standing there in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, more casual than she'd ever seen him at work, but still unmistakably himself. You look beautiful, he said, and the simple honesty in his voice made her stomach flip. You clean up pretty well yourself. The restaurant he'd chosen was small and intimate, tucked away in a neighborhood Maya had never explored. It wasn't flashy or trying to impress, just good food and quiet corners where conversations could unfold without interruption. They were seated at a table by the window, and for the first few minutes, they simply looked at each other across the table, the weight of what they were attempting settling between them. This is strange, Maya said finally. Being here with you like this? Good strange or bad strange? I'm not sure yet. Ask me again in an hour. Ethan smiled and some of the tension eased. They ordered wine, studied the menu, made small talk about the restaurant and the neighborhood. But beneath the pleasantries, Maya could feel the real conversation waiting, the one about who they were to each other outside the context of Hayes Collective. It was Ethan who finally broached it, after their food arrived and they'd settled into the rhythm of the meal. I need you to understand something, he said. When Sarah died, I shut down parts of myself I didn't think I'd ever access again. I focused entirely on Oliver and on building the company into something she would have been proud of. For 5 years, that was enough. It had to be enough. Maya set down her fork, giving him her full attention. And then you asked me that question, Ethan continued, why I ate alone. And something about it, about you, broke through the walls I'd built. Not immediately, not dramatically, just slowly, over time, until I realized I was looking forward to Thursday and Saturday evenings, not because of the routine, but because you were part of it. I didn't know, Maya said quietly. I thought I was just another server. You were never just another server. Even before I knew your name, there was something about the way you moved through that restaurant, efficient but kind, professional but genuine. You treated everyone with the same dignity, whether they were difficult customers or busboys. That's rare. Maya felt her eyes sting. You're making me sound better than I am. I'm describing what I saw, what I still see. Ethan leaned forward slightly. But I also need you to know that I'm aware of the complications, the power dynamics, the potential for people to misunderstand your success, the impact on Oliver if this doesn't work out. I've thought through every possible way this could go wrong. And yet you're here anyway. Because I've also thought through what it would mean to let fear make this decision for me. I've already lost one person I loved, Maya. I'm not interested in losing another because I was too afraid to take a chance. The words hung in the air between them, vulnerable and brave and terrifying in their honesty. Maya reached across the table and placed her hand over his. I'm scared too, she admitted. Of all the same things you are, plus a few more. But I'm also tired of letting fear dictate my life. I did that for 4 years and it kept me safe, but it also kept me small. I don't want to be small anymore. Ethan turned his hand over, lacing his fingers through hers. The gesture was simple, but it felt like a promise. They talked through dinner about everything and nothing: Oliver's latest obsession with space exploration, Maya's mother's improving health, the projects they were working on, and the ones they wanted to tackle. They talked about Sarah, about the grief that never fully disappeared but learned to coexist with joy. They talked about Maya's father, about the hole his death had left, and how she'd spent years trying to fill it with responsibility and self-sufficiency. And slowly, the strangeness Maya had felt at the beginning of the evening transformed into something else. Not comfort, exactly. It was too new for that. But rightness. A sense that this person across from her was someone she wanted to know more deeply, someone whose presence in her life felt like an addition rather than a complication. When they left the restaurant, Ethan drove her home but parked a block away from her building. "I don't want this evening to end," he said, "but I also want to do this right. No rushing, no assumptions about where this is going. What does doing it right look like to you?" "It looks like more dinners like this one. It looks like getting to know each other outside of work contexts. It looks like being honest about what we're feeling and what we need." He paused. "And it looks like having a conversation with Oliver before this goes any further. He's already attached to you, Maya. If we're going to explore this, he needs to be part of the decision." Maya's heart clenched at the thoughtfulness of that statement. "When?" "Soon, but not tonight. Tonight is just us figuring out if this is something we want to pursue." "And is it?" Maya asked. "For you, I mean." Ethan looked at her with an expression so open and unguarded that it stole her breath. "Yes, absolutely yes. Then it is for me too." He walked her to her building, and they stood in the doorway for a moment, the city humming around them. Ethan reached up and tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so gentle and intimate that Maya felt her entire body respond to it. "Can I see you again?" he asked. "Tomorrow, if you're free. Just coffee and a walk. Nothing formal." "I'd like that." He smiled then, a real smile that transformed his entire face, and Maya realized she'd do just about anything to see that smile again. The next few weeks unfolded with a careful, deliberate pace that felt both frustrating and exactly right. They met for coffee on Saturday mornings, took walks through the city, had dinners at quiet restaurants where they could talk without being observed. At work, they maintained professional boundaries that were now slightly easier because of the reporting structure change. Maya officially reported to Linda, which removed the direct supervisor relationship and made the optics less complicated. Linda, for her part, seemed to understand more than she said. When she'd called Maya into her office to discuss the new arrangement, she'd been direct and practical. "I'm not going to pretend I don't know something's happening between you and Ethan," Linda had said, "and I'm not going to lecture you about the complexities of workplace relationships. You're both adults. You're both smart enough to navigate this carefully. What I'm going to say is that your work speaks for itself, Maya. Whatever happens or doesn't happen with Ethan, you've earned your place here. Don't forget that." The validation had meant more than Maya could express. But the real test came in early April, when Ethan asked if she'd join him and Oliver for dinner at his apartment. It was the first time she'd be in his personal space, the first time the three of them would be together in a context that acknowledged the shift in their relationship. Maya arrived at the apartment, a spacious but surprisingly warm space in a building overlooking the park, with a bottle of wine for Ethan and a new book about space exploration for Oliver. She was more nervous than she'd been before the Meridian presentation. Oliver answered the door, his face lighting up when he saw her. "Maya, Dad said you were coming for dinner. We're making pasta." "Well, Dad's making pasta. I'm supervising." "That's an important job," Maya said seriously. The evening was easier than she'd feared. Oliver's presence created a natural buffer, his chatter filling any potentially awkward silences. They ate pasta at the dining table. Ethan had clearly put effort into the meal and talked about school, about Oliver's science fair project, about whether penguins or polar bears would win in a hypothetical fight. After dinner, while Oliver was absorbed in building something elaborate with Legos in the living room, Ethan and Maya cleaned up the kitchen together. It was domestic and comfortable in a way that felt both foreign and deeply natural. "He adores you," Ethan said quietly. handing her a plate to dry. He's been talking about this dinner all week. The feeling's mutual. He's an incredible kid, Ethan. You should be proud. I am, but I also worry about introducing complications into his life. He lost his mother when he was 2. He doesn't remember her, which is its own kind of grief. The last thing I want is to bring someone into his world who might not stay. Maya set down the plate and turned to face him. Is that what you're worried about? That I might not stay? I'm worried about a lot of things. That I'm moving too fast, that I'm being selfish, that I'm risking his emotional security for my own happiness. Those are fair concerns, Maya said. But Ethan, you can't protect him from every possible loss. Life doesn't work that way. What you can do is teach him that some things are worth the risk of loss. That opening your heart to people, even when it's scary, is what makes life meaningful. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something shifting in his expression. When did you get so wise? Probably around the time I decided to take a job from a stranger who made me an impossible offer in a restaurant parking lot. He laughed, pulling her into a hug that felt like coming home. They stood there in his kitchen, holding each other while Oliver's cheerful narration of his Lego construction drifted in from the other room, and Maya felt the last of her fear dissolve. This was what she wanted. Not just the professional success or the financial stability, but this: connection, intimacy, the possibility of building something with someone who saw her and valued her and challenged her to be more than she'd thought she could be. Later that evening, after Oliver had been sent to bed, though his "but I'm not tired" protest suggested he'd be reading under the covers for at least another hour, Ethan and Maya sat on the couch with glasses of wine, talking in the low voices of people who didn't want to wake a sleeping child. I need to tell you something, Maya said, and I don't want you to freak out about it. Ethan's eyebrows rose. That's not a reassuring opening. I've been offered another job. She felt him tense beside her. What? A headhunter reached out last week. Apparently my work on the Meridian project got noticed. There's a firm in Boston looking for someone to lead their community impact division. The money's significantly more than I'm making now, and it would be a senior position right away instead of having to work my way up. Ethan was quiet, his expression carefully neutral. Are you going to take it? No, Maya said. I turned it down yesterday, but I wanted you to know about it because I need you to understand something. I'm not staying at Hayes Collective because of you. I'm staying because it's where I want to be. The work matters to me, the team is incredible, and I have opportunities to grow here that I might not have somewhere else. You're part of why I love being there, but you're not the only reason. She watched the tension drain from Ethan's shoulders. I needed to hear that. I've been worried that you might feel trapped, that you'd stay because of us, even if it wasn't the right professional choice. I'm learning to make choices based on what I want, not what I'm afraid of losing. And what I want is to build my career at Hayes Collective while also exploring what this could be. She gestured between them. Both things can be true at the same time. Both things can absolutely be true at the same time, Ethan agreed. He set down his wine glass and took her hand. Maya, I know we agreed to take this slowly, but I need you to know that for me, this isn't casual. I'm not exploring this to see what happens. I'm in this because I can see a future where you're part of my life and Oliver's life in a real, permanent way. Maya's heart hammered against her ribs. That's terrifying. I know, but is it the bad kind of terrifying or the good kind? She thought about her mother's question weeks ago, whether it was worth the risk. And she thought about everything that had led to this moment. The question in the restaurant, the impossible job offer, the leap of faith she'd taken when every instinct told her to play it safe. The good kind, she said. Definitely the good kind. Ethan kissed her then, soft and careful and full of promise. And Maya let herself fall into it, into him, into the possibility of a future she was finally brave enough to reach for. The months that followed weren't without challenges. There were moments when Maya felt the weight of office scrutiny, whispers about whether her success was her own, or reflected from her relationship with Ethan. There were long conversations with Linda about maintaining professional credibility, about working twice as hard to prove she deserved every opportunity she received. There were times when balancing the personal and professional felt impossible, when she wanted to scream at the unfairness of having to justify herself in ways her male colleagues never did. But there were also victories. In May, Maya led a proposal for an education technology client that won unanimous board approval and became one of Hayes Collective's flagship projects. In June, she was promoted to senior analyst with a salary increase that finally let her move into her own apartment, a one-bedroom in a better neighborhood with actual closets and windows that didn't rattle in the wind. In July, she published her first article in a major industry journal about community-centered development strategies, establishing herself as a thought leader independent of Ethan's reputation. And through it all, her relationship with Ethan deepened in ways that felt both natural and extraordinary. They fell into rhythms. Wednesday dinners at his apartment with Oliver, Saturday morning coffee before Maya's standing brunch with her mother, stolen moments in his office after hours when they could just be two people who cared about each other without the weight of professional expectations. Oliver accepted the relationship with the easy adaptability of children, though he did have opinions about the arrangement. "So if you're dating my dad, does that mean you'll come to more of my stuff?" he asked one evening in August while they were playing board games at Ethan's apartment. "What kind of stuff?" Maya asked. "Like my soccer games and school performances and the science fair. Dad comes to everything, but it would be cool if you came too sometimes." Maya glanced at Ethan, who was watching the interaction with barely concealed emotion. "I'd really like that," Maya said to Oliver, "if it's okay with your dad, and if you want me there." "Duh, that's why I asked." It became another rhythm. Maya at Oliver's soccer games on Saturday mornings, cheering from the sidelines alongside the other parents. Maya helping him with science homework at the kitchen table while Ethan made dinner. Maya reading him bedtime stories when she stayed over, her voice joining the rotation with Ethan's in Oliver's nighttime routine. She was becoming part of their family, and the realization filled her with equal parts joy and terror. In September, 9 months after that first dinner, Maya came home to her apartment to find a letter on her doorstep. Not mail, an actual envelope with her name written in Ethan's precise handwriting. Inside was a single sheet of paper. "Meet me at Marcello's tonight at 7, corner table. I have something I need to ask you." Maya's hand shook as she read it. This was it. Whatever came next, whatever question Ethan needed to ask, it would change everything. Again. She arrived at Marcello's at 6:55, her heart hammering so hard she could barely breathe. The restaurant looked exactly the same as it had that night almost a year ago when she'd asked Ethan why he always ate alone. Same soft lighting, same piano music, same sense of quiet elegance. But the corner table was different. It wasn't empty anymore. Ethan sat there waiting for her, wearing the same charcoal suit he'd worn that first night. And across from him, in the chair that had been empty for so long, was a place setting with a single red rose. Maya walked to the table on trembling legs, and Ethan stood as she approached. "Thank you for coming," he said, and his voice was rough with emotion. "You knew I would. I hoped you would, but I didn't know, not for certain." He gestured to the chair with the rose. "Will you sit?" Maya sat and Ethan returned to his seat. For a moment, they just looked at each other across the table where everything had started. "A year ago," Ethan began, "I sat in this exact spot, alone, waiting for something I couldn't name. I'd been sitting here for months, going through the motions of living without actually being alive. And then you asked me a question that changed everything. 'Why do you always eat alone?' Maya said softly. 'Why do I always eat alone?' Ethan repeated. And I didn't have a good answer then. But I have one now." He reached across the table and took her hand. "I was alone because I'd convinced myself that being alone was safer than risking my heart again. That protecting myself from loss was more important than opening myself to love. And then you came into my life and showed me that safety isn't the same as living. That sometimes the bravest thing we can do is let ourselves be vulnerable with someone who sees us." Maya felt tears streaming down her face, but she didn't wipe them away. "You've made me braver, Maya. You've made Oliver happier. You've made our lives fuller and richer and more meaningful than I thought they could be after Sarah died. And I don't want to spend another day wondering what it would be like to have you truly be part of our family." Ethan stood and came around the table. And then, in the corner of the restaurant where a year ago he'd sat alone with his grief, he knelt down on one knee. The entire restaurant went silent. "Maya Collins, will you marry me?" He pulled out a small velvet box and opened it to reveal a ring, not ostentatious, but beautiful in its simplicity. A single stone that caught the light, surrounded by smaller stones that formed a delicate band. Maya couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, could only stare at this man who'd seen her when she was invisible, who'd believed in her when she couldn't believe in herself, who'd offered her not just a job but a chance to become someone she'd forgotten she could be. Yes, she finally managed. Yes, of course, yes. Ethan slipped the ring onto her finger with hands that shook slightly, and then he was pulling her to her feet and kissing her while the entire restaurant erupted in applause. Roberto appeared from somewhere near the bar, grinning widely. "About damn time!" he called out. Maya laughed through her tears, and Ethan held her close, and in that moment she understood that this was what the empty chair had always been waiting for. Not just someone to fill it, but someone to transform what it represented. From loneliness to connection. From isolation to family. From merely surviving to actually living. They had dinner at that corner table, and it felt like the closing of one chapter and the opening of another. When they left the restaurant hours later, hands intertwined, Maya paused at the door and looked back one more time. The corner table was empty again, but this time, the emptiness didn't signify loss or loneliness. It signified possibility. The space waiting for the next person to walk through those doors and ask a question that might change everything. The wedding took place in November, exactly 1 year after Maya had said yes to Ethan's job offer. It was small and intimate, just family and close friends, held in the garden of a historic estate that somehow managed to hold on to the last warmth of autumn. Oliver served as ring bearer and took his duties with such seriousness that he practiced his walk down the aisle 17 times the day before. Maya's mother sat in the front row, healthy and beaming, wearing a new dress that she'd insisted on buying herself with money from her improved medical care. Linda and David and the whole Hayes Collective team had come, and Maya felt overwhelming gratitude for these people who'd become not just colleagues but genuine friends. As Maya walked down the aisle, her mother on one arm, and on the other side empty space where her father should have been, but where she felt his presence nonetheless, she thought about the journey that had led to this moment. A year ago, she'd been a waitress drowning in bills and responsibility, convinced that struggle was her permanent state. She'd asked a question without expecting it to matter, had said yes to an opportunity that terrified her, had chosen risk over safety again and again until risk started looking less like danger and more like possibility. And now she was here, walking toward a man who loved her, not despite her rough edges, but because of them, about to become stepmother to a 7-year-old who'd already claimed space in her heart, surrounded by people who'd watched her transform from someone who couldn't see her own value to someone who knew exactly what she was worth. When she reached the front and Ethan took her hands, his eyes were bright with unshed tears. "Hi," he whispered. "Hi," she whispered back. The ceremony was simple and heartfelt. They'd written their own vows, and when it was Maya's turn to speak, she looked at Ethan and Oliver and the assembled guests and felt the full weight of how far she'd come. "A year ago, you asked me why I always looked tired," Maya began, her voice steady despite the emotion. "And the truth was that I'd forgotten what it felt like not to be tired. I'd spent so long in survival mode that I didn't remember there were other ways to live. You reminded me. You showed me that asking for help isn't weakness, that accepting opportunities isn't luck, that believing in yourself isn't arrogance. It's just finally seeing what other people have seen in you all along." She squeezed his hands. "You gave me a job, but you gave me so much more than that. You gave me a chance to remember who I was before life taught me to be small. You gave me space to grow, and the support to take risks, and the safety to fail without losing everything. You saw me, Ethan. Really saw me. And that changed my entire life." She turned to Oliver. "And you, kiddo, you showed me that love doesn't have to be complicated. That sometimes it's as simple as asking someone to come to your soccer games or help with homework or read bedtime stories. Thank you for letting me into your life. Thank you for making me feel like I belong." Oliver was crying openly now, happy tears, but tears nonetheless. Ethan pulled him into the embrace as Maya continued. "I promise to love you both with everything I have. I promise to choose bravery over fear, honesty over comfort, and growth over stagnation. I promise to show up, to do the work, to be present for all of it, the joy and the struggle, and the ordinary moments that make a life. I promise to remember that I deserve this, that we all deserve this." When Ethan said his vows, he spoke about second chances and the courage it takes to open your heart after loss, about how Maya had taught him that protecting yourself from pain also protects you from joy. about how loving her had made him a better father and a better man. And when the officiant pronounced them married and Ethan kissed her while Oliver cheered and the guests applauded, Maya felt something slot into place that she hadn't even known was missing. This was what coming home felt like. The reception was joyful and chaotic in the best possible way. Oliver gave a toast that was mostly about dinosaurs, but included a sweet declaration that he was really happy Dad married Maya because she's cool and also she brings good snacks. David told embarrassing stories about Maya's first weeks at Hayes Collective. Linda made everyone cry with a speech about watching people become who they're meant to be. And Roberto, who'd been invited as a representative of the restaurant where everything started, raised his glass and said, to asking questions, to taking chances, and to the people brave enough to say yes when life offers them something impossible. As the evening wore on and guests began to leave, Maya found herself on the garden terrace with her mother, watching the last light fade from the sky. "I'm proud of you," her mother said quietly. "Not because you married well or because you have a successful career. I'm proud because you didn't let fear win. You could have stayed safe, stayed small, stayed in a life that wasn't quite enough because it was familiar. But you didn't. You chose to grow. That takes real courage." Maya leaned her head on her mother's shoulder. "I learned it from you. You chose to keep fighting when Dad died, when you got sick, when everything seemed impossible. You showed me that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs to be done despite the fear. Then we make a good team, don't we? The best team." Later that night, after the guests had gone and Oliver had fallen asleep on the drive home, Maya and Ethan sat on the couch in their apartment now, the space they'd chosen together, the home they were building. Maya was still in her wedding dress, too tired to change but too wired to sleep. "What are you thinking about?" Ethan asked, his arm around her shoulders. "About empty chairs," Maya said, "and how sometimes they're not empty at all. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right person to see what they represent." "And what do they represent?" Maya thought about the corner table at Marcello's, about the chair that had seemed like a symbol of loneliness but had actually been an invitation to ask questions, to take risks, to choose connection over safety. "Possibility," she said. "They represent possibility, the space waiting to be filled with something meaningful." Ethan kissed the top of her head. "I'm glad you filled that space, Maya Collins Hayes. I'm glad you were waiting for me to find it." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who'd found each other in the unlikeliest of circumstances, who'd built something real out of courage and honesty, and the willingness to believe that some risks are worth taking. Outside, the city hummed with its endless noise and movement, thousands of stories unfolding simultaneously, thousands of empty chairs waiting for someone brave enough to ask why they're empty. And somewhere in that vast tapestry of human connection, a waitress was serving customers at a restaurant, moving through her shift with practiced efficiency, not yet knowing that tonight might be the night someone asks her a question that changes everything, because that's how it happens. Not with grand gestures or dramatic moments, but with simple questions asked at exactly the right time by people who are paying attention. Why do you always eat alone? What do you want? Are you willing to risk safety for the possibility of something more? Maya had asked those questions. She'd answered them. And in doing so, she'd transformed not just her own life, but the lives of the people she loved. She closed her eyes, feeling the steady rhythm of Ethan's breathing beside her, and let herself rest in the certainty that she was exactly where she was meant to be. Not because life had become easy, it was still complicated, still challenging, still full of uncertainties, but because she'd finally learned that the opposite of struggle isn't comfort, it's purpose. And she'd found hers, in the work that challenged her, in the family that embraced her, in the courage to keep choosing growth over safety, honesty over pretense, love over fear. The empty chair wasn't empty anymore, and it never would be again.